All right, everybody, welcome back to another Commercial Pilot Ground School. How's everyone doing out there? Welcome on this Thursday. This is actually going to be the last one. And let us know if you have any questions before we get going, but welcome back, everyone. Good to see everybody in class. The final test is actually going to be going up a little bit later tonight, so don't worry about that. It should be up by the time class is over. How's it going, Cody? Doing well, everybody? Howdy, Johnny. Let us know if you have any questions. We'll get going here in just a moment. And like I said, today we'll talk about how to get your written endorsement, how to get the FAA Wings credits. In addition to that, we'll go over a couple things we need to cover, such as density, altitude, and then it's pretty much safety-related things, such as aeronautical decision-makings, crew resource management, single resource management, SRM, single resource pilot management, and then we'll talk a little bit about the oral as well and kind of what to expect. So, yeah, slightly different mic tonight, so just kind of changing it up here. But welcome, everyone. And then, yes, the Google form will be available tonight as well. So keep in mind that will get you the credit. We'll go through that step by step, how to actually go about that process of requesting credits. All right. Any other questions? Roger. Awesome, Joel. Good luck with the instrument check ride there. Afro, welcome back. All right, well, let's get going anyways. We might actually get a little bit out of here a little bit early, which would be nice. But this is class number 5, Mark, so class number 5. So as mentioned, this is the final class. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about exactly how do you get your FAA written test endorsement. In addition to that, we'll talk about density, altitude, the aeromedical factors, aeronautical decision-making, crew resource management, and then the only other thing that's not listed in there is going to be the information on, it will actually be the information on the oral and the oral prep for it, okay? So if your quizzes, Kelly, are not showing completed, don't worry about it. That's not the end of the world. If you can, there's a way to check your stats. So if you go to the student profile or go to your profile, you can actually look at the statistics, and it actually shows every single time that you have attempted a quiz and what the results were and which were the correct questions and which were not. So at the end of the day, don't necessarily rely on that little green check mark. I know it's nice to see, but sometimes it doesn't show up unless you actually click on every single link that's in the actual group. So with that, any other questions before we get going here? Student profile isn't showing up. What I can do is, it is kind of hidden, the student profile, so we'll put a link in the commercial so that way you can do it really quickly, Patrick. So I'll put that in there really quickly. I know if you guys can if you guys go to the, I believe it's the online courses, and then just go out of the commercial and go into the private. If you go to the free private pilot one and go about like four down on the left, it says the student, I think it says student profile. So what we'll do is we'll put that link in the commercial section as well. So that way you're able to find the student profile a lot easier than kind of backtracking like that. So, but I will let the tech team know that will be the request moving forward. So with that, everyone, appreciate everyone showing up and coming here for the last couple weeks. It's actually one of the shorter courses, amazingly. If you guys enjoyed the courses or any of our courses, please feel free. It always helps our future students basically find out additional information about us. And leave a review on Facebook, or feel free to do so on Google. Either one works for us, but that kind of lets other students know kind of what to expect and everything else. We always like to hear from our students, so that always helps at the end of the day. So with that, the course updates kind of remain the same. We don't really have anything that we're adding between now and the end of the year. So as mentioned, we're going to be doing the private pilot ground school, which is actually, this is the first week. So tomorrow night will actually be the 3rd course. And if anybody here needs a refresher on airspace, we're doing 4 hours of airspace, so that would be the lesson that you want to make. But other than that, it is a 4-week course. So this is basically wrapping up week 1 out of 4. The rest of it will be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. So that's available to you if anybody here needs like a refresher on potentially how to read performance charts or the basics of flight planning. A lot of the stuff in the commercial pilot, you're kind of expected to know at this point. That's the reason why we don't spend a lot of time going over performance charts. There are questions that are on the actual commercial that relate to the performance charts, but at the end of the day, as pilots, we should already know how to read performance charts at this point. Beyond that, we're going to take a 1-week break after the private pilot ground school in October, and we're going to pick up the instrument pilot ground school. Those are all free classes as well. So that's going to start on October 26th, and that will run until 1 week before Thanksgiving, so November 20th. So that's going to be 12 classes, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And then as we discussed, we're starting the CFI ground school, which is coming up. And the CFI ground school will actually run year-round. And what we've decided to do is basically have about 15 classes a year, not a year, but a month, 15 classes per month, which is basically comprising an entire ground school for the Certified Flight Instructor Ground School. Each of the lessons is going to be roughly about 4 hours or so. So the way that that'll work is the first hour and a half to 2 hours will be a lecture. And then what we're going to do is we're going to break down into smaller groups. So the groups will be, we're trying to do 6 to 8 students in each group. And then that will be moderated by an instructor. And what will end up happening is you'll have an opportunity to teach your fellow students in that smaller group the same materials that were taught to you earlier in the larger lecture. And then that will allow you to basically get immediate feedback, make any type of corrections, and really help prepare you for the oral. At the conclusion of all that, the nice thing kind of about this program that we put together is that you don't actually need to sit there for every single course. So in the event that you miss one course, that actual lesson will come back around, that live lesson will come back around the following month. So let's say you had a late night at work or something came up, you can just go ahead and basically attend that at a future date and time. That basically includes all of your custom lesson plans. So it's over 700 pages of lesson plans that you don't have to write, which is kind of nice. But it also includes all the other information so everybody's on the same page. So that is a little bit about the CFI program. If anyone has any questions, you can email Rebecca at checkride-prep.com. She can answer them for you. As everyone knows here, it's a completely free course with all the materials, but for the commercial program, we will close it out on the 28th of September. I believe that's next Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific time. And we do that mainly for making sure everybody kind of gets everything done and in order, and that allows us to have a higher completion rate. But as you all know, we do have the lifetime access here, which is coming up. And the lifetime access, as mentioned, is I'll tell you guys about it, but it will be ending at the end of the month here. So anyways, we are going to be doing the Q&A starting up again. So the Q&A is on Saturday. I will send out a link usually on Friday evening to remind you. Right now, tentatively, it's at 3 p.m. for this coming weekend. I just have to check 1 or 2 other things. But what we'll end up doing is we're going to basically cover the top questions missed in this class, the commercial class. And in addition to that, we're also going to look at questions from our other more basic classes, such as the pilot class. And we'll look at the FAA test questions. We're going to be looking at just the various topics, and then I'll be there to answer any other questions you may be having trouble with. So that way, if you run into any issues with the final test or anything else in the next couple days, you'll have that opportunity on Saturday to open. I'll stay as long as we need to answer any questions, if it's charts, if it's flight planning, anything that might be, may not make sense at that given time or moment. The shirts, people were still asking about shirts and stuff. So the shirts are in. So obviously we have our original shirts, which are basically these guys right here. They're the I Survived COVID. Wrong one. It's the I Survived COVID shirts, and they are in the black, or they also have the ones in the camo as well. Those were our original designs with the company. And then what we ended up adding were basically, it's actually on the reverse of the shirt. So on the front of the shirt, it still has the little mountain with the airplane and the number 2. And then we moved these designs to the very back of the shirt. So I call it the sunset version of what we're looking at. And then we also have the hats as well. So These are available, and they are actually in stock. So the original COVID shirts, all the black ones are 20 bucks. The camo ones are $25, and the colorized ones are also $25. So that's available to you, and the hats are $20 as well. The hats is like a fitted stretched hat, if you want to think about it that way. There's 3 different sizes. And in addition to that, remember that if you are a lifetime member, you get 20% off of all the shirts. So talking about lifetime members, as I was discussing earlier, we do have the Aviator Ultimate Lifetime Access for anybody that wants it. And it will give you access not only to this course that's going to be refilmed anyways coming up next month, but you'll also have basically access to all of our other courses, such as the Private Pilot Ground School, the Oral Prep course, the Instrument Ground School. If anyone here is interested in the commercial version of the UAV or flying those, we have a course on that. The ForeFlight course, which I've told everyone, we will be refilming the ForeFlight course in December. The commercial ground school, you guys are already in there, but if you get the lifetime access, of course, the course won't close out. You'll have, indefinite amount of time to finish it. Take your own time, take as many practice quizzes and tests as you guys want. The coupon for the shirts, and then that also includes basically indefinite, the training videos, the quizzes, the 24/7 instructor support, and the written test endorsements and the FAA wings credits. For most of us out there, we all know how expensive instruction is. So basically for the first 50 students, we were offering a 1-hour one-on-one with the CFI, and it's a ground lesson only. But that's, if you're having any trouble with any of the material, this can basically help you out. In addition to that, if you need help with your oral, you can use it. Doesn't necessarily have to be for the commercial. It could be for another, anything else, private instrument, CFI questions, whatever it may or may not be. All right. So with that, that is my public service announcement, everybody. So thank you so much for listening. But before we continue, since this is our last class, and as per usual, I want to thank all the mods out there. So once again, we've got Missy, Zaf, Rebecca, Tom, and Travis. So thank you again, everybody, for showing up. They do this out of the kindness of their heart. Missy, poor Missy, is like dealing with fires here in California, so she's packed up and ready to go occasionally. So I thank her for always being here and doing her best as well. She's been here since the beginning, Zaf as well. So thank you, everybody. So keep in mind, on average, most of our classes get about 3,000 comments per class. That's a lot to sift through. You guys are a very professional bunch, so we don't have to actually work as hard, which is fantastic. In some of our new classes, like the private pilot classes, in our larger ones, we would get up to 13,000 comments in a class. And of course, since that's everybody's kind of new and they don't really understand the material as well, what ends up happening is it's a lot more work for everybody. So thank you again. I do appreciate it. Thanks for sticking with us. I know those folks out there who are a little unscrupulous in the chat. Hopefully we don't have them in the near future here. So thanks again to that team that kind of supports this effort. I do really, really appreciate it. So like anything else, when we are talking about study tips and kind of moving forward, remember that what this comes down to is the commercial is called the CAX test code. So that is the test code that you're actually going to find in the ACS material. And as you can see here, I've highlighted the one in red. It's called CAX. It's the Commercial Pilot Airplane. You will have 100 questions on the quiz, or the test that is. You need to be 16 years of age. You have 3 hours, and you need a passing score of 70%. So you basically get to miss 30 questions, which is actually pretty good. There are some other ones, but we don't really worry about those. The Canadian conversion, and then also the military competence for a commercial pilot certificate. That's if anybody has military experience out there. But that commercial pilot airplane exam is actually broken into the following. So these were all of the different areas that they do talk about, aeronautical decision making, different types of operations, accident reporting. And what ends up happening is that they break it down by between 5 to 10%. So basically every single topic that we're talking about could potentially come up 5 to 10% when we look at this. So try to take advantage of all the tests and the quizzes available to you. There are about almost actually closer to 800 questions in the FAA testing database that we've uploaded here. And just continue to take the practice tests. So try to identify anything that you're having problems with, And whatever you're having issues with, we're here to help. So feel free to send us an email. In addition to that, you also have access to the Facebook group as well. So that's been growing steadily. And I think there's roughly about 4,100 people in there last time I checked. And everybody's helping each other. So sometimes you can get an answer much faster through that group as well. And then also remember, the FAA testing supplement is your friend. So just like all the other testing supplements, the first 20 or 30 pages offer the legend, and that legend can basically be used for, for assistance if you forget maybe what some airspace is or something along those lines, okay? You don't need to know everything by the time you're done. What I would really focus in on is if you can take the final exam at least twice with preferably an 80% or higher, then obviously I would run over and take the final exam as well, all right, with the FAA Testing Center. For those that don't know or has been out of it for a little while, in order to schedule an FAA written test, it is now absorbed into PSI. We've had so many companies in the past here, so what we have is all the competitors were basically absorbed into this single company called PSI. And you're going to go to this website, faa.psiexams.com. I believe they encourage you to do it on their website, and they don't necessarily want you to call anymore. But if you don't have an account, you can basically click on the create an account, or you can sign in as you know. And the testing one that you're looking for when you pull up the test code is obviously the FAA, and then the test code is CAX Charlie Alpha X-ray, which is for the commercial pilot airplane exam. And then what will end up happening is, you can, obviously schedule it based upon your zip code and find whatever testing facilities are open. So each testing facility has their own discretion in terms of if they are operating in this kind of COVID world that we live in. There's a couple that aren't, but the majority here, at least in the Los Angeles area, are. So keep that in mind. Mark Lozano makes a really good point. I love Shepherd Air. Shepherd Air has a really cool testing program. You can literally sit there and go question by question by question. I think I've used Shepherd Air for every single FAA exam except for the private, and the only reason why was because of the fact that they don't offer one for private pilots. So that's another really good resource. So all right, let's see here. And then you guys are all familiar with I think there is a Discord, which is like an online group with a lot of these notes and stuff. So keep that in mind. That is available to you as well. Just seeing if I missed anything else here. But great job, everyone. So the testing database and all that stuff is currently located on our website. For those that are unfamiliar, you can just Google Shepherd Air. Their program, I think, for each test is about $30, and the license lasts for 1 year. And I really like that program, like I said. So, all right. As we know, or if it's been a little while, here's your reminder when you go in to take your FAA written test. Obviously, things to bring and things not to bring. You still need an acceptable form of identification. So if you look at the table on the left, all the applicants are going to need some type of valid or current ID. That ID has to have your photo, date of birth, signature, physical, and residential address. So that's what everybody needs. And then it's broken down to, are you a citizen, a resident alien, or are you a non-citizen? So if most of us are probably citizens here, so you would need your identification card, and that has to be issued by any type of U.S. state, territory, or government, or a passport or an alien residency card. The other one as well is the non-U.S. citizens. For those folks, you need a passport, and you also need one of the following. It's either the driver permit or license issued by a U.S. state, or the ID card issued by any government entity. So that's basically what you need to bring. Other things as well is you'll need the logbook endorsement, take the FAA written test, which you'll receive after this class. The aviation plotter, I'd still recommend bringing it, and then also a manual or E6B calculator. All those things are very helpful. Obviously, what we don't want to bring to the testing center that the FAA does not want is going to be cell phones, any type of personal recording devices. Anything that really allows us to record what's going on or recording the test questions is really inappropriate or not allowed. And remember, the testing center will provide the FAA testing supplement, any paper, pencils, anything that you need beyond that. but it's really the test proctor who has the ultimate authority of what you're going to bring in and what you're not allowed to bring in. As you can see to the left of that, you may have the potential to use test aids, scales, straight edges, protractors, plotters, navigational computers, log sheets, and all models of aviation-oriented calculating devices that are directly related to the test. Anybody here or may potentially need additional time due to what they're calling a dyslexic applicant or potentially a learning disability, you need to reach out directly to the Flight Standards District Office, which is known as the FSDO, in order to coordinate whatever paperwork they need, and then they can basically accommodate however the situation basically is required. Okay. Course is available till the 29th, I believe. All right. Getting your FAA written test endorsement. So in order to qualify, it's pretty easy. It's not like we had 20 lessons or anything. Just watch the 5 lessons. It could be a combination of the live or recorded or one or the other, does not matter. And then just pass the final exam with an 80% or higher. If you have the lifetime access to the commercial pilot ground school or basically any of our programs, you're going to have an unlimited amount of time to request the FAA endorsement. So that's a question that we get quite a bit. When you log in and you go to the commercial class, what you want to do is you're going to select class number 5. And when you go below the video placeholder where the video normally goes, it is the commercial final class. And commercial final class, you'll then see a couple different options. 2 of the options that are available to you are you can select to request either FAA written test endorsement or the FAA wings credits. And when you do so, that will open up a link that looks just like this on the right, and it'll say FAA commercial pilot written test endorsement request. Please allow us 5 to 7 days to go ahead and get these out to you. Hopefully they'll end up in your hands or in your inbox a little bit sooner. When you fill it out, just make sure that the FAA written test endorsement matches your actual government issued ID. So whatever you have on your government issued ID, depends on whatever you're using, whether you're using a passport or a driver's license, that it actually matches. Otherwise, you might have issues. Even if you are able to take the test, you might have issues on the day of your check ride if things don't seem to match up. So that's the purpose of this form or this document. It's just going to ask you on the next page a couple of questions, and then very, very, very simply, it will ask you, what's your first name? Do you have a middle name? Do you have a last name? And just confirming the information, and then also confirming your email address that you want us to send that information to. If you don't have an ID, Cody, then just then you don't have to worry about it. Just make sure you use your actual name. All right, same process for the FAA wings credits. Log in, go to class number 5. On class number 5, scroll down beneath the video, and just make sure you click on this one, which is going to be the request of FAA wings credits. It's a separate form that will pop up. Once again, allow 5 to 7 business days for it to be reflected into your FAA wings account. And then I believe this course will get you 4 credits for the purposes of it. I'd have to double check that, but that's all it is just make sure that you have an account set up through FAAsafety.gov if you don't. And if you do, just make sure you're giving us the correct email address, so that way we're not providing credit to someone else who may have not actually been here. Okay? Any questions with that so far? All right. If we are ready to get going here, and like I said, we will take a break here in about 25-30 minutes or so, and we're going to see if we can kind of blast through some of this stuff. Some of it is a little bit of repeat and reminder of things that you may have learned in the past, so we're just kind of refreshing it before we get into the test. So as stated, we're going to talk a little bit about density altitude and then switch gears and do aeromedical factors. And then we're going to wrap everything up with the CRM, the SRM, and then also, of course, our wonderful aeronautical decision making, and we'll do that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at density altitude. So density altitude, remember, is affected by the pressure, altitude, temperature, and humidity. So obviously with a higher density altitude, that will impact our aircraft significantly because it usually results in a longer ground roll, and potentially a very, very slow takeoff. And you always have to check your performance numbers, but at the end of the day, remember that that airplane is probably did not roll off the factory line at any point in time. It probably ran off the factory line 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it's probably not going to perform up to or match the exact numbers. So that's the reason why you always want to develop your personal minimums. So with that, I'm going to share a video. You guys probably all know who Flight Chops are. And this is a video where someone is basically trying to take off at a higher density altitude. They have a high performance aircraft. They are fairly skilled. They know their aircraft. The book says they can do it, but the question is, can they do it or can they not do it? So remember that, don't take it for granted. There's ways of kind of bypassing density altitude. Even if you're at a higher elevation, taking off in the early morning or after the sun sets, that will usually prove to be more effective than taking off on midday. So like I said, let's go ahead and watch this, and then we'll talk about it and just do a quick review of density altitude. All right, see everyone in just a sec.
You're going to use up every possible inch of runway available.
I recently saw this footage for the first time and it scared the hell out of me. It's actually like 4 years old and it made the rounds going viral in the aviation community back then. And I wondered, how could I have missed this? And then I realized it was because I had one of these around that time, so I was a little bit distracted from flying. But after things settled down in my life, I got back into it. So anyway, seeing this video actually inspired me to think about my personal minimums. Adding a margin to weather minimums is kind of an obvious one, but it's really important to think about margins with performance calculations as well.
Let me get my mojo. Alrighty.
So Chris Palmer from Angle of Attack was kind enough to share this footage with me so I could revive it and put a Flight Chop spin on it. The basic spin is, it's a high performance airplane a turbo bonanza, I believe. He's taken off from a very short runway, surrounded by trees at a high density altitude.
Alright, so let's do it.
Chris does an amazing job analyzing exactly what happens here, so I'm not going to get into those kind of details, but I'm going to provide links that you have to check out. For now, what I want to simply do is watch and react to it.
Airspeed is alive. Backed. Engine's in the green. Backed.
So clearly Chris knows he's facing a bit of a challenge as he starts this takeoff roll. But he knows his airplane, and he did his math, and he knows the numbers say it can be done, but the question is, will it be done? So after rotation here, he's committed, and you can see things aren't going as planned.
That's just a little scary. Well, oh boy. Wow. Okay, things we are not doing again.
So that couldn't have been any closer. Let's just back it up and check this out. Look at those treetops. I mean, the wingtips are definitely below those. So he just squeaked it through that gap. He managed to instinctually turn just slightly left there to find that one gap that he had, and he made it through. And he fought the urge to pull back, which I think a lot of people would have done, and then he would have mushed into those trees for sure. So kudos for flying right on the edge, man. He got it out, but just barely.
Okay, Chris.
So in Chris's article where he breaks it down, you'll see a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on in the conversation thread.
I think we've learned our lesson. I actually thought we were kind of screwed there for a second. So did I.
So I think there's a saying that goes something like, experience is a difficult teacher because she gives the test first and the lesson afterward. And all lessons in aviation are not survivable. So the moral of the story here is, just because the performance calculations say you can do it doesn't mean you will be able to do it. I mean, you need to fly the airplane perfectly. You need ideal conditions exactly matching whatever the conditions were supposed to be in the charts. So the reality of it is, most airplanes are 10 plus years old that we're flying these days. And, you know, unless you're a multi-thousand hour pilot, you're not going to be flying perfectly. So the odds of you getting it done exactly as the book says are extremely low. And Chris is a very experienced pilot, and again, he does an amazing job breaking down everything that went on here, so I'm not going to get into the details, but at the end of the day, add a margin. So personally, I think I've kind of always ballparked 50%, but I'm going to officially say at this point, I'm going to add a 50% buffer to the performance numbers for my personal minimums for any takeoff calculations that I do going forward. So I'm just a private pilot doing my best to stay
All right, everybody.
current and
So
learn.
just a quick reminder. So remember that obviously density altitude is not something you really want to play around with. There's been several airports that I've been into, all across the country that have their own challenges or issues. One that I went into a couple years ago was Monument Valley Airport. This is actually an image of it. As you can see here on the screen, it's kind of a one-way in, one-way out airport. You can't do a standard traffic pattern. At the end of the runway is a giant canyon that's almost 1,000 feet high or higher. And airports like these basically have a density altitude usually in the 7 to 8,000 range, because this is just out by the Grand Canyon area. And what ends up happening is especially on a warm day, these can be really challenging airports. This airport elevation itself is 5,100 feet. So it's very easy to see what ends up happening when the temperature basically rises. You can clearly see that this could be a very, very challenging approach and a challenging airport, although it is kind of a fun place to go to. But I remember taking off, and we were taking off obviously going away from this cliffside kind of around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We already, had half tanks and a 160 horsepower Cessna. And I want to say, we calculated everything. And the problem was initially there's a tailwind, and then it kind of shifted from headwind to tailwind, and it kept shifting. And we were literally sitting there idle, waiting to go until it shifted to a headwind. And when we took off, I think it probably took us about 8 to 10 miles to get at least 1,000 feet in the air. We were just very, very low to the ground pretty much the entire time. So luckily there was no downdrafts or anything like that would have affected us. But these are all things that we have to take into consideration at the end of the day, just because of the fact that it is so dangerous. So with that, let's go ahead and look at and see kind of pull back the slideshow here. So remember, with density altitude, the things that really, really affect it are going to be the height, which is your field elevation altitude or pressure altitude, the heat, which is basically your temperature, and then the humidity. Now, when we do calculations, we're pretty much utilizing the pressure altitude and the actual temperature as well. So the definition of density altitude, if you go back to your private pilot days, is going to be pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. So remember that the higher the density altitude, the aircraft is going to definitely struggle in terms of getting off the ground. So when we look at these images here on the left, at sea level, our ground roll is fairly short, and we can basically clear most obstacles. When we start increasing that density altitude or taking off at a higher altitude, we are becoming a little bit more susceptible to some of those trees in the background, to the point where if we go up to, potentially closer to the service ceiling of most of these aircraft out there, they can't climb. In fact, some of them have negative numbers if you look at them. So that is kind of how it's affected when we look at different altitudes. But when we start adding the temperatures, remember that once we start kind of getting into those hotter territories, even 80, 90 degrees, that could potentially increase the density altitude significantly, or when you start getting over the 100-degree mark. But it's really that pressure altitude as well. So we here actually in Camarillo sit at sea level. We're like 77 feet-ish. And I know even on a hot day, like when it was 118 degrees here the other day, our density altitude was calculated to be somewhere around like 4,400 feet. So that is pretty remarkable, going from what would normally be a very, very easy takeoff at sea level, and now everything is fairly sluggish because of the significant temperature increase. When you go to some of these airports that have obviously density altitude issues, they do put these cool little signs on the edge, and what it does is it'll let you know what the airport elevation is, and then it'll obviously calculate the density altitude for you to kind of remind you, can you do this or can you not do this? But also remember, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you are comfortable yourself with your own limitations. Now, with limitations, being a commercial pilot, we don't necessarily, who says we can go or we can't go, right? If you're the pilot in command, it's still your decision whether or not you have passengers on board. It's still your decision to make. There's nobody that's going to stop you with that. If you're second in command, most good captains will consult their co-pilots, if you will, or their first officers, and you'll kind of work together to relieve any concerns. But it's generally assumed that the pilot in command or the captain probably has more experience because they sat in that right seat before they moved to the left seat. But it's always kind of checks and balances with each other when we look at this stuff. All right. So looking at the first FAA, got 3 test questions here that are basically going to look at the question around density altitude, what it is, and then we're also going to look at how to compute it once again. So let me go ahead and open up the poll here. And what effect does high density altitude as compared to low density altitude have on propeller efficiency, and why? Is it A, efficiency is increased due to less friction on the prop blades? B, efficiency is reduced because the propeller exerts less force at high density altitudes than at low density altitudes? Or is it C, efficiency is reduced due to the increased force of the prop in the thinner air? Give everyone another moment on that to look at that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here in just another second. Got a couple more people answering. All right, so it looks like the balance of the class has the correct answer. So correct answer here is actually going to be B. So that is going to be your correct answer. It's the efficiency is reduced because the propeller exerts less force at high density altitudes than at low density altitudes. We had 18% of the class with C, which is actually incorrect. But remember, that propeller is actually going to produce thrust that's proportional to the mass of the air being accelerated through those rotating blades. So keep in mind, if the air is less dense, then the propeller efficiency is actually decreased. Okay, so less dense air, that prop is not going to be as efficient as if it was denser air. All right, let's go ahead and look at another FAA test question here revolving around density altitude. What effect does high density altitude have on aircraft performance? Does it increase engine performance? Does it reduce climb performance? Or C, it increases takeoff performance? %, please. All right. So everybody pretty much has the idea. As we all remember, it's going to reduce climb performance. So correct answer here is going to be B. So fairly easy on that. That is probably the biggest one. So that increase in either the air temperature or humidity are going to be the big ones. And that's really what's reduces the climb rate. All right, the math ones, nobody ever likes these, but we'll go ahead and look at one of them here. This is going to refer to a density altitude chart. Remember, most aircraft are going to have a density altitude chart inside of their POH or AFM. You can also do this without a density altitude chart. You can actually do this on an E6B as well. So either way works. All right, so if you want to, I will show you guys the figure here in just 1 second. And let me go ahead and bring up the test question. We're going to refer to this figure, and I'm going to go ahead and slide this one over just so you can see the density altitude chart. We've probably all seen one of these at some point, But using this chart, determine the pressure altitude with an indicated altitude of 1380 feet MSL with an altimeter setting of 28.22 at a standard temperature. And then, of course, your answers: A, 2,991 feet MSL, B, 2,913 feet MSL, or C, 3,010 feet MSL. Ooh, this is where the class splits up, huh? Everybody's going to get 30% on each of these. So remember the way that this works, if you're going to use the density altitude chart to figure out, first remember what the definition is. It's pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature and or pressure, right? So they're giving us an altimeter setting of 28.22. So we know that's non-standard because standard is going to be 29.92. There are two ways, like I said, to go about this, basically answering this question. But what we're looking for is we need to find in this green and white chart on the right, we need to find somewhere 28.2. And basically 28.2 is going to basically be somewhere between these two numbers. It's somewhere between 1630 and 1533 because at this point it gives us 28.2 and 28.3. Obviously, the closest one is 1630. If you want to take the mathematician angle out of this, what you can do is you can actually figure out the difference or at least interpolate the numbers. I always think there's an easier way of kind of answering these questions, but remember that if we're talking about 29.92 and we have a altimeter setting which happens to be lower than standard, so that happens to be 28.22, okay? Then what we need to do is we know that this is actually going to increase our altitude if we were to make the adjustment. We're going to basically increase our altitude or decrease our altitude in order to get to a pressure altitude. But because we're going from 28.22 to standard, whatever number we compute, we're going to add to the actual field elevation of 1380. Now, like I said, you can basically interpret the numbers from the chart in the green or white, or you can just figure out the difference. So remember what I said, or from your training at least, is 1,000 feet is going to be at least 1 inch of mercury. So that is what it kind of equates down to. So if we are basically going to be going from 28.22 to 29.92, the question is how many feet is that? So how many feet did you guys calculate on that when you were looking at it? Can't read the chart, apologize. I will give you guys a zoomed in one. Welcome, Tom. What is the difference between 28.22 and 29.92 in terms of feet? How many feet difference is that? If 1 inch is 1,000 foot difference. $1,700, yep. So 1,700 is kind of the guesstimate, I guess you'd say. The exact amount, if you're going to look at it and you were to actually do the math calculation, is if you take the field elevation here of 1380, well, what that is we would add the number from what we would compute. So remember, if we were to kind of interpolate those numbers, then we would actually increase it about 260 feet roughly. Okay, so if you were to add that up, what that would mean is that would basically give us around 1,600 feet roughly. Everybody's doing it the 170. Let's see here, 1,700, 1,700. All right, good. Okay, so we all have that. Then what we're going to do is we are going to take the actual altitude. We can do the exact answer as per the book is actually 1610. 1700 will work roughly as well. But if we were to take that, what we're going to do on the density altitude chart is we're going to look at the actual temperature, and then we're going to look at what altitude we're actually going to be at, and then that will give us roughly our own density altitude. So looking back at the question, we are determining the pressure altitude with the indicated altitude and standard temperature. So standard temperature is 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and find 59, and I'm just going to draw an arrow infinitely up vertically. And then from that point, I need to figure out roughly where 16 or 1700 feet are. It's not going to make a huge difference. So I'm looking at these pressure lines, if you will, or the pressure altitude. And I know that it is between the 2000 here. So let's see here. It's closer to here. See if I can do this a little bit better on the arrows. Everyone got the 1700 though when you look at the pressure altitude? You're adding the 1610 plus the 1380. I just want to make sure we're all on board with that. And we come up with about just shy of 3,000 feet for the pressure altitude. So if I come up just shy of the 3,000 foot, and I hate these charts, guys. This is what my arrow points to, and that's the best I can draw it. The correct answer here is actually A. It's 2,991 feet MSL. It's just shy of 3,000 feet, but I'm just going to go through the math real quick here to make sure we're all understanding. You are taking your altitude, and then what you're going to do is you're going to add the correction, which you guys kind of came up with roughly 1700. If you were to do the interpolation, which is grabbing these two numbers and then figuring out the difference, the exact number is 1610. So what you're going to do is obviously add those numbers up, and then what will end up happening is the book has it at 2,990.6 feet because they're very precise. But if I go with everybody else's answer here and just add 1,700 to it, that'll roughly work as well. That's fairly close, which gives us, if we're using the 1,600 foot answer, it gives us 3,080 feet. So either case, if we were to look at the potential answers, the problem with one of those is that the 3,080 is going to be a little bit too high, and that's the reason why people are choosing C. The correct answer, of course, is going to be this 2990.6. So that's the reason why we don't want to necessarily guesstimate the 1,700 foot one, because this one's incorrect. So then when we have our pressure altitude, we're going to take the standard temperature, figure out roughly where the 2,900, almost 3,000 feet are. In terms of our pressure altitude, we draw a line straight across, and then that gives us somewhere around 3,000 feet. In this case, the correct answer is A, which is 2,991. And you don't have to have the exact one on your check ride. Thank you, Missy. If you look at these in calculators, it's kind of funny. What ends up happening is I've noticed that different calculator brands and even the ones online, they give you a slightly different answer, and I've never really understood why. It should all be roughly the same. It's not about density altitude. So, all right, let's go ahead and continue and talk about the aeromedical factors on a different note here. So if we look at this for the aeromedical factors, I'm going to end the poll so you guys can see that. The aeromedical factors, as we all know, are basically factors that are concerning us as human beings and the external conditions in which the forces are basically imposed on it. For those of you that have been through instrument training at this point, you're going to know that flying through the clouds and those types of things really they stress aeromedical factors. Specifically, we don't really want to trust our body when it comes to a lot of situations where trust the instruments and not our body at the end of the day, right? And of course, the reason being is that our body plays a lot of tricks on us. So the reason why we teach this in all the classes and the FAA asks us to do it is we're just trying to advise pilots what are the potential issues that we might see in flight, or the larger potential issues, and then what are the factors that we need to basically understand or have knowledge of, so that way we know how it affects our body at the end of the day. So in this section, we're just going to review the different types of hypoxia, how to treat it, the carbon monoxide, hyperventilation, and then what we'll do is we'll basically go into a couple of the spatial disorientations and illusions, and then dealing or coping with spatial illusions or disorientation. So let's go ahead and look at these one by one. So there's obviously different types of hypoxia. The first one is going to be hypoxic hypoxia. Then we've got hypemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, and histotoxic hypoxia. So the I can't even say these anymore. The hypoxic hypoxia is really just what we call altitude hypoxia. So this is just a lack of oxygen that's absorbed by the body due to atmospheric conditions. So remember that as we go up in the atmosphere, the partial pressure becomes decreased, or it's less. So some of the big things here that we want to note is that the concentration of oxygen remains the same, about 21% from the ground until it gets to space, but the partial pressure is actually reduced by 50% by the time from sea level to 18,000 feet. By the time you're at 34,000 feet, that same partial pressure is reduced by 75%. So that's pretty significant. Now, this is most likely to occur if you have any type of faulty equipment, malfunctions, improper use in terms of the pressurization system. Remember that there's always the time of useful consciousness chart, which you see in the yellow on the right-hand side. It's kind of surprising that at 20,000 feet, you can potentially, not have any issues, or at least be conscious for 30 minutes. But remember that you're probably not going to be on your A game just because it says useful consciousness. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily processing at 100%. The next one that we have is hypemic hypoxia. So this is going to be generally resulted to CO poisoning. And remember that CO actually attaches to your hemoglobin about 200 times more easily than oxygen. This can be caused by a number of things. So anemia, disease, blood loss, deformed blood cells, carbon monoxide poisoning, and generally going to be associated with smoking as well. So remember that anytime you do have CO poisoning, that it can take up to 24 hours to recover from it. Even if you're feeling better, it's imperative that you basically land as soon as possible and get treatment as necessary. But it can also result in, after donating blood, that's the reason why they tell us not to fly for 24 hours after you donate blood, and that's one of the big things. Stagnant hypoxia is just a deficiency in the body, and that's really due to poor circulation of the blood. It could occur potentially from pulling excessive G's or the cold, where we have the constricted blood vessels, but most of the time it's going to be some type of disease related in most cases. And it may also cause hyperventilation. Histotoxic hypoxia is the inability for the body to use oxygen, and this is going to be generally caused by alcohol, drugs, and things such as narcotics and or poisons. So those are the big types of hypoxia that we want you to know about. The symptoms, we were probably taught these or have maybe experienced these. The biggest ones that you're going to notice are obviously some type of numbness and cyanosis, or like a blue tintish color of the fingernails and the lips. That's going to be kind of one of the first signs. But we could experience any or all of these depending on the significance or the severity of the exposure. Obviously, all of these are going to be very, very serious, but at the end of the day, the treatment to this is going to be descend to 10,000 feet or below. Try to slow your breathing rate if you can by 4 to 5 breaths, and if available, try to utilize supplemental oxygen. If you are utilizing supplemental oxygen and you start to have some of these symptoms for whatever reason, make sure you check your connections and the equipment. Maybe there's a faulty piece of equipment that kind of failed at some point, and that's the reason why it's not working. If you do have oxygen equipment installed, make sure that you select it to the emergency position instead of the diluter level. So remember, the emergency position is going to give you 100% oxygen. The diluter is mixing that oxygen with the actual air in the environment around you. So that's the reason why that's so important. All right, the next one that we're going to talk about here is going to be carbon monoxide poisoning. We kind of talked a little bit about that, but we're going to go into more depth. So once again, carbon monoxide poisoning is a real thing, and in aviation, it's probably most likely going to occur from some type of crack in the manifold where the exhaust is going to then enter the cabin at some point. That's what is most likely to happen. So at the end of the day, what you're probably going to notice is a headache, which would be the first one. Nausea, dizziness, breathlessness. It will potentially lead to collapse and loss of consciousness if you let it continue. The treatment is try to remove yourself from the environment, which can be very difficult because you're in a very, very small place. So identify the possible sources, and we know the largest possible source is going to be cabin heat. So obviously turn off the cabin heat if that's what you're using. Try to ventilate the cabin to the best of your ability. If that means opening up the windows, do so. If there's a speed in which your aircraft has to slow down, do so. Obviously in jet aircraft, if you're flying something more advanced, then you're not going to just crack open the window at that point. But whatever you can do to basically ventilate the cabin, that's really what's important here. Use the oxygen if it's available. In addition to that, let ATC know. Don't keep them in the dark. It's better to let them know what's going on rather than telling them at the last second if things start to get worse. Let them know that you suspect CO poisoning. If you think about it, just because you're telling them you suspect it does not mean you're declaring an emergency. So don't worry about that. If you need to declare an emergency, do so. And then no matter what, doesn't really matter. Even if you suspect it, try to land as soon as possible. Don't continue a flight unless you know what is actually going on or could potentially go on. Okay. All right. With that, let's go ahead and look at another FAA test question here. So a large accumulations of carbon monoxide in the human body result in what? Is it A, tightness across the forehead, B, loss of muscular power, or C, an increased sense of well-being? Give everyone another moment here. It looks like we got a split class again. Choose the most appropriate answer or the one that appears the most correct. Okay, that's one way to think about it. And it doesn't help that we just looked at a few different types, and of course each type we looked at probably 20 different symptoms, so they all kind of blended together at the end of the day, right? All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll right there. Correct answer is actually going to be B. It's a loss of muscular power. Some of these others, remember that A is going to be incorrect, and that's primarily because hypoxia is what's giving you, C is dealing with hypoxia. So an increased sense of well-being is generally meaning that you're hypoxic. And then when we have tightness across the forehead, that is actually another hypoxia thing where, in addition to the sense of well-being, you could actually have stress, which creates the tightness across the forehead. So A and B are relating to hypoxia. B is the only one that's actually dealing specifically with carbon monoxide in these circumstances. All right. All right, the next one we want to talk about is known as hyperventilation. Hopefully no one has been doing that in this class or any of the events going on lately. But hyperventilation is just an abnormal increase in the volume of air breathed in and out of the lungs. And what that does is it will actually significantly reduce your carbon dioxide content in the blood, which is actually important. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Even if you had yourself or someone else that was hyperventilating and they made it to the point where they actually passed out, the body is going to naturally recover, and it will slow the breathing. Okay. Now, keep in mind the treatments that we're going to talk about. I have had some doctors in my classes, and they don't necessarily 100% agree with these treatments, but they are pulled directly from the FAA. So I'm just letting you know what the FAA says, even though I'm sure current medical advice is probably a little bit more advanced than what they tell us here. Okay. So remember that the buildup of the carbon dioxide in the body, what we're trying to do is get them to talk loudly, try to control their breaths, count the breaths in and out, use a paper bag, those types of things as well. The method is not actually trying to force you to breathe carbon dioxide, but rather forces you to think about your breathing rate. Some people think we're breathing into a bag so that way we can rebreathe the carbon dioxide. We're just trying to get their mind off of it. But no matter what it is, try to figure out what the source of the panic or the anxiety is. Try to distract the passenger in that case. With folks that potentially are, nauseous, or let's say they get motion sickness, the worst thing you can have is someone staring at the instrument panel, 5 or 6 inches away from the 5 or 6 inches away from their face, and the plane is actually bouncing around, right? So if you have someone that's motion sickness, you get their mind off of it by having them stare at something. So you pick what they're going to stare at. You tell them, stare at that mountaintop over there. You see that house on that mountaintop, whether it exists or not. You're trying to get their eyes outside of the cockpit. So we're doing the same thing here, where we're trying to get their mind at ease and off of the situation, whatever it may be. Talk to them about something maybe non-aviation related, if that's what it takes. But at the end of the day, even if this happens from a passenger inside of your cockpit, it is not, don't turn it into an emergency situation. You don't need to make things worse, is all that I'm saying. All right. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is spatial disorientations and illusions. So keep in mind that, like I said, our body likes to play a lot of tricks on us, but what we're going to talk about is the vestibular system, the somatosensory system, and then our visual system, which makes up how we actually sense what's going on in terms of the roll, pitch, yaw of that actual aircraft. So anytime we talk about spatial disorientation, that just means a lack of orientation with regard to the actual position, attitude, and the movement of that actual aircraft in space as well. So most of us have probably had a flight instructor at this point have us close our eyes, and we're trying to tell them, he or she, what the aircraft is actually doing at that moment in time. So what we're going to talk about is a few of the major illusions that you're most likely to see. Primarily going to be autokinesis and then the false horizons, but keep in mind there are about 15 plus visual illusions that you can always read about. I know we teach it in the CFI courses, but we don't have to cover it as in depth in these classes. So the first part is the vestibular system, and these are all the organs found in the inner ear, and the inner ear is really what senses position by the way in which we're balanced. The somatosensory system are all the nerves in our skins, muscle, and joints, and along with our hearing, they actually sense position based on gravity, feeling, and sound. And then obviously our visual systems, our eyes, are going to sense the position based on what is actually seen or what is occurring outside. But our eyes do tend to play tricks on us. So as mentioned, one of the first illusions we want to look at is known as false horizon. So false horizons, they can be fairly dangerous just because of the fact that your eyes are playing tricks on you, and this could happen during the day or the night. I've seen this with students during the day, where even during the day they start to follow a cloud, and the cloud happens to be going sideways like this, and they try to orient the aircraft with that cloud, and it's like a sloping cloud deck, and that's one of the ones I've seen a few times students do. It can also happen at night. So if there's a lit road or something that is portraying the horizon, you might accidentally try to orient the aircraft to that false horizon instead of the real horizon as well. So this could be, like I said, sloping cloud decks. It could also be ground lights. It could also be even stars or something that's brighter. And this could easily result in potentially loss of control of the aircraft. All right. Vestibular. All right. Thank you. All right. Next one we've got is autokinesis. Autokinesis. So autokinesis is pretty simple. Anytime we're flying in the dark, if you stare at a light long enough, it could potentially look like it's moving, okay, even though it's perfectly staying still. And if your brain kind of misinterprets it, and what ends up happening is you'll try to actually orient the aircraft to that light as if it's moving. And you're going to kind of follow it, which means that you could potentially lead to loss of control of the airplane, right? So those are the only two that we need to talk about, and then we're going to talk about how to actually cope with it, which is spatial disorientation. And Patrick's asking, do the pilots still hang a string? The only time I know that they hang a string, at least outside on the window, is like multi-engine training when they're kind of showing you some of the effects. But I'm unfamiliar with the string method on single-engine stuff. All right, so coping with spatial disorientation. These are the main ones. Obviously, if you can experience it in a safe manner, whether you're in the plane with another pilot or instructor, but there are these other crazy devices out there. So they do have like the Barney chair or the Vertigon and these types of things that will basically give you the opportunity to experience spatial disorientation. Try to always grab and understand your pre-flight weather briefings. Anytime you're flying in really marginal visibility, so less than 3 miles, or where the horizon is really unclear, make sure that you are comfortable and you have the training in order to do that, or you're up to date with your instrument training, so that way you can be able to fly safely from point to point. Do not fly into adverse weather conditions, dusk, darkness, unless proficient in the use of flight instruments, as stated. So make sure that you understand that. Ensure that whatever outside visual references are used, that they're reliable fixed points on the Earth's surface. Number 6 is an important one. Don't make sudden head movements during takeoff, turns, approaches to landing. Turns in particular, if you move your head fairly rapidly in a turn, it will actually, that's probably the fastest way to get disoriented and actually cause a little bit of a headache as well. Just make sure when they're saying number 7, be physically turned on for a flight. So that's just making sure you're healthy, you're safe. You are not ill. You aren't taking any medications that may impact you. You've slept. You're not under the influence of alcohol, drugs, anything along those lines. So, and once again, they're stressing the use of flight instruments and relying on them. So trust the instruments. Disregard your sensory perceptions. And then at the same time, remember that cross-reference your instruments, and that'll give you a little bit more faith in what's going on. All right. Let's go ahead and look at the 2 test questions that it is relating around. Let's see here. So the first one is the lack of orientation. So a lack of orientation with regard to position, altitude, or movement of the aircraft in space is defined as what? Is it A, spatial disorientation, B, hyperventilation, or C, hypoxia? Hopefully this one should be pretty easy. All right, I'm going to end it right there. So correct answer in this case is going to be A, spatial disorientation. That is the lack of orientation as discussed previously. Next one we want to talk about for the test question is going to be relating to one of the following. Let me bring up the test question here. What is It often called when a pilot pushes his or her capabilities in the aircraft's limits by trying to maintain visual contact with the terrain in low visibility and ceiling. Is it scud running, mindset, or peer pressure, or all of the above? Give everybody another moment. All right, so 93% of the correct answer, it is going to be scud running. So scud running is what the definition of that is. All right, just a couple minutes late, everybody, but I appreciate everybody hanging in there. We are going to take a quick 10-minute break right now. It looks like it just flipped over, so let's come back at 22 past the hour, and I will see everybody in just a few. All right. All right, buddy, welcome back. Hopefully you got to stretch your legs, grab something to eat. What we're going to do from this point on is going to be talking about kind of mitigating accidents using a few different things such as aeronautical decision making and crew resource management. So with that, if we were to look at general aviation accidents, and this is something that we've probably seen in the past, right? You know, majority of accidents are really going to happen during the critical phases of flight. So that basically includes takeoff and climb, and then also either the approach or the landing, right? Very few accidents are really in the actual flight time. So when we look at it, we're trying to figure out how do we actually make aviation safer. And general aviation accidents make up a majority of the accidents, over 50%, but it still does occur in the commercial world as well. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is something called aeronautical decision making. This is called ADM. So this is a systematic approach to what we say the mental process, which is basically risk and stress management, is used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in response to any type of given set of circumstances. So we're basically always using this at any point in time from our pre-flight in order to our decisions of are we actually making this flight or not. Our planning, this can affect our planning, and then it's also used throughout the actual process of the flight. Now, yep, Zaf has a couple links as well, so that he's sharing with you, so feel free to check those out. There are deep dives that go into aeronautical decision making and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about. So we're just going to do kind of the surface stuff. So keep that in mind if you guys are interested in it. You know, feel free to kind of do a deeper dive on the FAA materials. So the ADM process, you know, is really not going to eliminate the errors. It's just going to help you, the pilot, recognize the errors. And one of the things we're going to talk about are the different types of personal attitudes that are hazardous to safe flight, and we'll talk about each one of those. But part of ADM as well is learning behavior modification techniques, learning how to recognize and cope with stress, developing risk assessment, using all of our resources, whether we're working on a crew or individually, and then evaluating the effectiveness of an individual's aeronautical decision-making skills. So remember, at the end of the day, all this is really all that risk management is you can kind of think of it like slices of Swiss cheese is kind of one way I kind of think about it. And what ends up happening is we all know that there's holes in Swiss cheese, and they're basically at various places. They're usually not going to be in the same location. But if you put enough layers between you and the potential accident at the end of the day, we'll call that the accident. Each one of these layers basically represents something different. So this might be right here, the fact that, you know, you have a pre-flight in terms of that's your pre-flight, and you've got a weather briefing. And then at that point, you know, what will end up happening is that hopefully one of these layers, maybe your weather briefing is what ended up catching you, or stopping the incident from basically occurring. So this is a kind of an essential model, if you want to think about it, or an easy way to think about it for risk management. Because there's enough layers, maybe it went through the pre-flight and it went through your weather and your decision making and everything else, and maybe air traffic control caught it. Okay. So the more layers that we can put between us and this potential accident at the end of the day is really our whole goal here in aviation. So think of each one of these layers as little tiny safety nets. And one safety net is not going to cover everything. So we have to use a lot of different layers. And that could be using other crew members, passengers. That could be air traffic control. That goes down to our training. It also goes down to crew resource management, which we're going to talk about, single pilot resource management, and a lot of other factors. But that is risk management in a nutshell. If you were to look at that, if anybody here ends up doing their ATP training, they'll go into days and days of risk management stuff. So if you're interested in it, it is kind of interesting if you have the time. All right, so hazardous attitudes. This is obviously what we want to avoid. Gear up, prop strikes. Those are always very bad. So what remember that with aeronautical decision making, these are the studies that the FAA has conducted, and what they found was that there's 5 hazardous attitudes that could potentially interfere with the ability to make a sound decision and exercise proper authority. So remember, the ones that we're going to talk about are going to be anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, macho, and resignation. Okay, so first one we're going to look at is anti-authority. This is the don't tell me attitude. So this is folks who do not like authority and do not like to be told what to do. They're going to do it their own way, regardless of rules and regulations and procedures. They're basically going to think that this is really kind of silly, and what's worked for them in the past is going to work for them in the future. And any time that this occurs, this is going to be something that's probably one of the more serious of the 5, even though they're all serious. But this is the one you want to think about. So anti-authority is don't tell me. And keep in mind, while it's always your prerogative to question authority if you feel it's an error, understand that you may be in error. Although, if you do get a conflicting or an unusual request from air traffic control that doesn't make sense, like they're going to send you into the class Bravo and you weren't cleared in the class Bravo, then obviously they're human as well, and they make errors just like we do. So that's not telling you to not question it, but just remember that the rules and procedures are in place for a reason. The next one that we have is known as impulsivity. This is where we're doing it quickly. And this is the type of attitude that people feel when they need to do anything immediately. And it may not be in the best interest of actually what's going on at the end of the day. You're not necessarily thinking about what your actions will basically result in. So you may not think of any of the alternates or anything else that might be better that comes to mind. You're just going to act kind of rashly and do something in order to do something. Okay, so this is known as impulsivity. The next one is known as invulnerability. It will not happen to me, right? So many people out there are basically going to come to this stance that accidents just happen to other people and they do not happen to me. And the reason why is a lot of people, the older that we get, we bring in a lot of our personal biases from life. And if you've made it 40 or 50 years or even 30 years in life and not had an accident, you will be more prone to this type of mentality or attitude just because of the fact that what will end up happening is that if you haven't gotten into a car accident and you're 40 years old, then you're pretty lucky, but you're also probably in the mindset that, well, that stuff just happens to irresponsible people, and it's never going to happen to me. So they understand the fact that it could happen. It's just that it's probably not going to happen. And like I said, the experiences, which is just a word for age, is a huge contributing factor. Pilots who think this way are more likely to take chances and then increase risk, which is kind of what we are going to be doing. Okay. Yeah, weight and balance for this guy. That would be pretty interesting. All right, last one that we're going to talk about is machoism, or the macho attitude. Actually, this is the second to last one. So this is the I can do it. And this is kind of stems from the military in a way, where people are just trying to show each other off or try to impress others. But this does happen pretty much anywhere in aviation. So this is the I can do it, I'll show them type attitude. But keep in mind, a lot of people think this is a male characteristic, but women are also equally susceptible to this. So it can happen to both genders in these circumstances. All right, so the last one is resignation. We probably have all met someone in life. Life throws us challenges, and then magically it's just, well, I don't know, I'll just do whatever needs to be happen, or I kind of quit, or I don't want to deal with it, right? We want to sweep this under the rug, and we'll let someone else kind of deal with it. So pilots feeling, any type of feeling of any type of resignation, they don't actually see themselves as anything they do, whether it's right or wrong, is not going to make any difference in what happens at the end of the day. All right. So what's the use of this? So when things go wrong, when things go well, the mindset is that, well, I got lucky. And when things go badly, the mindset is that someone is out to get me, or, well, hey, it's bad luck. The pilot will leave the action to others for better or for worse. They don't have any input, and sometimes such pilots will even go along with unreasonable requests just to be the nice guy. This is probably one of the worst qualities, especially in emergencies. Remember, they kind of drill this into our heads in airline training, where this is something you really want to avoid. There's always something that can be done to try to remedy the situation or make it better. This seems to come up in emergency situations where if something were to occur, they just kind of leave it to the other person or potentially just don't want to deal with it. So imposter syndrome, that's another way of kind of thinking about this as well. All right, so those are the 5 large ones that we're going to be talking about here in terms of different type of attitudes. So with that, what I'd like to do is just ask a couple FAA test questions. The first one is going to be talking about what will reverse. Let me pull it here so I can actually talk about it. All right, what is the antidotal phrase that can help reverse the hazardous attitudes of anti-authority? Is it A, rules do not apply in this situation, B, I know what I'm doing, or C, follow the rules? All right, give everyone another moment on that. All right, good job, everyone. So correct answer here is going to be follow the rules. So remember, with anti-authority, that's the don't tell me, I know better, the rules are not for me. So obviously the reverse or opposite of that is going to be to follow the rules. All right, let's look at one more, which is going to deal with the invulnerability. So what is the antidotal phrase that can help reverse hazardous attitudes of invulnerability? Go ahead and bring this one up as well. Is it A, it will not happen to me, B, it cannot be that bad, or C, it could happen to me? Right, got a couple more people answering. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end it right there. So correct answer, 96% of everyone here has the correct answer. It is C, it could happen to me. So remember, invulnerability is that it won't happen to me, it happens to other people. It's really found in people who think accidents happen to others and not themselves. So keep in mind that just the opposing side of that is it could happen to me. All right, good job, everyone. So with that, let's talk about personal minimums and kind of fitness for flight and those types of things moving forward. So personal minimums, as we all know, we should be familiar with them at this stage of the game, and we should all have some type of personal minimums. And of course, there is the difference between currency. Currency is the legal requirements that the FAA tells us what we need at the minimums, right? And proficiency, which is slightly different, right? Proficiency is going to be more in line with our capabilities, and obviously we might require different minimums than whatever the legal minimums might be. So when you look at this stuff, remember that at the end of the day, what we're looking for is based upon your own personal experiences. What are you comfortable with? And a lot of this will come down to your capabilities, how many hours you have, what your personal experiences are, and in addition to that, what is the aircraft that you're flying? Not all the aircrafts out there will suit the mission of whatever the flight is. So what I mean by that is you probably don't want to fly a little baby Cessna 152 in the mountains on a high density altitude day. It's not going to do very well. So think about the aircraft that might suit the mission of that flight a little bit better as well. So with the personal minimums, obviously you can challenge currency, but the other thing to look at is potentially looking at weather conditions. So we all know what the minimums are for VFR and also for IFR. You might want to look at creating your own. So just because when you get your IFR ticket, for example, you can go down to minimums at 200 feet above the ground, is that going to be the smartest thing if you just got your ticket, right? I remember the first time that I got my instrument ticket, I still went with a friend of mine who basically was also doing the instrument. And, you know, we started with minimums of 800 or 900 feet, and then we kind of worked our way down to the actual minimums as published. So you can look at these things, and of course, you'll adjust it based upon your capabilities. These were mine, I think, when I was a private pilot or student pilot back in 2017. I don't even remember. It's been so long. But in the Ember Air that I was flying on the American side, I mean, this number, a lot of these numbers have obviously changed. So I think the largest crosswind I had was something like 41 or 42 knots. I can't remember, but I think the thing maxes out at 44 or 45. So your numbers will fluctuate and change over time. The other ones I'll also say is kind of the runway length and some of the performance numbers. Go ahead and make sure you add your preference to it. Usually for pilots who are just starting off, I'll say add 50%, and then as you get more experience, you know, drop that down to maybe 25%. Just realizing that the POH performance is not necessarily, take it with a grain of salt at the end of the day, right? There's many ways to develop your personal minimums. So number one, look at the weather minimums that are out there. So remember the VFR, marginal VFR, IFR, low IFR terms that we use. What are you comfortable with, and what are you capable of doing? In addition to that, look at the other conditions. So besides weather, so this will include winds, temperature, short runways, anything along those lines, even narrow runways. That's also important. So once you have all that, the question is where are you going to personally draw the line and say, if it is above these conditions, then I'm not going. That's kind of what you need to do, and it's better to put it on paper. There are a lot of different, I guess, PDF plans that you can basically write these out to. And in addition to that, the FAA has additional guidance and guidance documents that allows you to kind of do these step by step. But whatever you end up doing at the end of the day, remember that it's all flexible and adjustable. It's not, you don't want to adjust it the day of and say, well, that's within a knot, let me go ahead and just bump it up for the day. It will adjust with your experience level and so forth over time. But whatever you kind of commit to, stick to the plan. Do not let yourself exceed your personal minimums, because you're really going to push your limits at that point. All right. All right. Next thing we're going to talk about is crew resource management, which is known as CRM. There's a lot of various theories and skills and those types of things, interpersonal skills that they talk about. But for the purposes of this course, all you need to know that it's really just a process of coordinated action among flight and ground crew members, and it allows basically effective interactions while performing the flight and ground tasks. So these two gentlemen here, you know, we obviously have a captain and we also have a first officer. You know, they are different responsibilities, you know, in the eyes of the FAA, but really they are really kind of trying to work together. And what will end up happening is once in the air, you're going to have a pilot flying and a non-pilot flying, and each airline will dictate what are the responsibilities for each one of these crew members. So usually on the ground, they take on their traditional roles of captains will do the taxiing, the first officers will handle the radios, and then once they're in the air, it'll depend on who's flying the airplane. And the person who's actually the pilot flying is usually just going to focus on that task alone. They're not going to do anything else other than call for checklists. And then in addition to that, they're also going to be obviously flying the aircraft, putting in the information. And then the non-pilot flying is going to be doing all the radio work, loading approaches if necessary, running the checklist that the pilot, the flying pilot is calling for, and those types of things. So where it kind of differs from that is any type of emergency situation. It is up to the captain to determine who does what action, but most captains will actually tell the first officer to fly the aircraft, so that way the captain can run the emergency checklist, and also basically coordinate whatever's going on with the back of the cabin, meaning the flight attendants and the passengers, working with dispatchers on the ground from the company, and also working with air traffic control. Both pilots are capable of flying a crippled aircraft, whether it's a single engine. We're all trained in single engine approaches and those types of things. So it's important that we're able to work together and have kind of those interpersonal skills that are going to, make the difference at the end of the day. So as you go up in your commercial, experience and getting commercial jobs, that is, especially in the airlines, you're going to be in more of these crew environments. And they're definitely a lot more regulated at the end of the day in terms of what your specific responsibilities are. Now, at the same time, there is situations where you could potentially have a captain or someone that's doing bad CRM. So we're going to look at this gentleman called Busy Jim. It is an old 737 Continental training video, and we're going to look at why this is bad CRM. In emergency situations. So I'll just kind of paint the picture here for you. This is taken in a simulator. So these guys are sitting on the ground, and it sounds like they just took off, and it was a potential engine fire, engine failure after rotation. So they're committed to go in the air at this point. So the question is this really the best communication in an emergency? So let's go ahead and take a look at it, and we'll talk about it when we get back.
Continental 101, taxi to position hold.
Continental 101, position and hold.
Before takeoff, check.
Before takeoff, checklist. Takeoff announcement has been completed. Air conditioning and bleeds are set. Start switches are continuous. Auto throttle's armed. Transponder is on, and the lights and strobes are on. The before takeoff checklist is complete.
Thanks, Jim.
Continental 101, you're clear for takeoff.
Continental 101, clear for takeoff.
There we go.
And we've got the lights. Power set 90%. knots. V1, rotate.
Positive rate, gear up, Jim. Jim, call the tower and tell them we've had a fire warning here. We're going out straight ahead. Jim, heading select.
Continental 101 has had a fire indication, like to proceed straight ahead.
Jim, heading select.
Stay with me, or climb runway heading up to 2,000 feet.
Jim, get that
runway heading to 2,000.
Get that engine failure checklist out, Jim. Jim, set talk bug. Jim, flaps 5, please.
Top bug set. Flaps 1.
Turn the auto throttles off, will you, Jim? Jim, can you call the company and tell them that we've lost an engine here and we're going to have to come back?
Okay.
Flaps up, Jim. How's that checklist coming, Jim?
Engine failure, engine fire, severe damage checklist.
Would you tell the girls in the back we've lost an engine, Jim? We're going to have to return. Can you give me an after takeoff checklist, Jim?
After takeoff,
Jim, you can tell ATC we're ready to turn around. Come on back in.
Houston Continental 101 is requesting a turn to downwind. Would like to come back around. We've got an engine fire indication.
Jim, I know you.
101, understand, like to return turn left heading 180, maintain 2000. This will be vectors for the final runway 14.
Left 180 and maintain 2000.
Jim, I know you're kind of busy, but I'm real busy over here too.
All right, so what a great captain and help that individual was. So obviously that's bad CRM, right? We all should basically see that. You have another individual that is completely swamped. They're trying to do a checklist. They're getting into, they keep getting stepped on in terms of everything that they're about to do. They're really not able to really complete or finish the task at that point in time. So when we're looking at this type of stuff, just remember that, even when you're in charge and those types of things, you have to realize every individual is able to process things in a certain order, only at a given pace. That was a pretty aggressive thing. I don't think they were ready to turn around and come back to the airport and land at that point. That was probably a little bit too premature. No checklists were done, but you also have to prioritize what's important. Do you think in this case, the flight attendants in the back knew there was a problem? They were returning to the airport. Was it really that critical at that point in time that, poor Jim called back there and let them know? The flight attendants know what's going on. So they understand that what the policies and the procedures are for that specific airline, and they're running their own internal checklist. The only thing that they care about is how much time do they have in order to prepare for landing. Are we going to be there in 10 minutes? Are we going to be there in 20 minutes? Their full checklist could be up to 30 to 40 minutes to secure everything for them. Okay. So that's really all they care about. And in our airline, we use something called the test method. So we just need to tell them basically what's going on. If it's a red emergency or a yellow emergency, which basically for us relates to a red emergency, we're going to evacuate, versus a yellow emergency, we're not going to evacuate. How much time is it, in terms of what, and then what is kind of the situation of what's going on and who's going to advise the passengers? Is it the flight attendants that need to do it, or is it the captain or the first officers that's going to do that? Okay. So that's kind of CRM in a nutshell. Now, a lot of us at this point, we may not be in an environment where we're working with another individual, but even if you have a passenger on board, let's say you're a flight instructor, you can do CRM with your student. You could have a student on day one doing a discovery flight, and you can tell them, hey, if you see anything or hear anything or smell anything, or hold this chart for me while I'm taxiing, so that way I can basically reference that. That is a version of CRM as well that you can basically do. Okay, so the other one as well that we're going to look at is single pilot resource management. I worked for Compass Airlines, Scott or David. So single pilot resource management is really just the art of managing everything by yourself. And as we all know, what ends up happening is when we fly by ourselves, it is a lot of work in order to keep the train and everything moving in an orderly fashion and to do it safely. So SRM training is really just helping you, the pilot, maintain situational awareness, and that helps you manage the automation and any type of aircraft controls and navigation tasks. Anytime if you have autopilot available and you have a good understanding of how it works, that's another way to kind of relieve the burden. Also pre-flight planning and planning ahead of time and thinking about exit strategies along the way. These are all things that will help with single resource management at the end of the day. But the whole point of this is to gather the information kind of in real time. You're analyzing it, and then you're making a decision on it. And this is basically a continual process that happens from departure all the way back to landing. So even though that flight is done by a single person, remember that you have a lot more resources besides just yourself. So like I said, if you have an autopilot, that's a resource. Air traffic controllers, that's a resource. So it relates to the same principles of CRM at the end of the day. And there's really no right or wrong answer in aeronautical decision making at the end of the day. So you could have the exact same situation with two individuals, and they come out with different ways to look at that same situation, and they'll make different decisions, and the outcome of the flight will basically remain the same. So, CRM is a very, very important thing that was really developed in the airlines, and it's trickled down to, general aviation. And like I said, this is a discipline in itself that people study, and it's kind of very interesting. So if you do get an opportunity to read anything else about CRM or SRM, then like I said, I would highly recommend it. It is kind of an interesting environment and those types of things. All right, so with that, everyone, let's go ahead and we're going to take our final 5-minute break, just a couple minutes early here. Stretch your legs, and then that is roughly it for the course material. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we exit today or finish up today is going to be using the PAVE checklist. And the PAVE checklist is something that I use or kind of have modified for my students for all of their check rides from private all the way through commercial. So you're more than welcome to stick around. Like I said, this is going to be helping people really prepare for their orals. But with that, let's go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back at 58 past the hour, and I'll see everybody in just a few. All right, everybody, welcome back. So this last little section that we're going to cover is going to be relating to getting you ready for your oral. Most of us out there are familiar with the PAVE checklist, and it's something that the FAA developed. The PAVE checklist is really a combination of the things we've been talking about, kind of utilizing the risk management. And the PAVE checklist is something that we use in the pre-flight environment. So what we're looking at in terms of the acronyms that we use for the PAVE checklist is pilot, passenger, aircraft, environment, and external factors. Okay, so when we look at these things, the way that we use these for the purposes of your oral is this company, Check Ride Prep, has basically utilized this model. And then what we do is we subdivide each one of these little areas into further points of discussion. And what we were able to do over time is basically cross-reference these areas with the ACS to determine, to make sure that we're covering all the materials. And by doing it in this manner, we're really able to kind of shorten the amount of time that it takes to get your oral done in a kind of a very organized fashion, if you will. So what I'll do is I will just briefly go through each of what you'd expect to find in each one of these sections here. And then what we'll do is we'll look a little bit more in detail. We don't have enough time to do the entire PAVE checklist, but we'll go into more detail on the first section, which is the pilot passenger as well. So in the first part here of pilot passenger, what we've kind of subdivided this for is, think of it as this is our opportunity in order to prove to the examiner that we are healthy, we're safe, we know what our limitations are, our privileges and limitations, and that's really what this point is. So what we're going to do is we would start with the I'm safe checklist, and we'll go through this section in more detail. But remember, that's really making sure that you and your passengers are healthy and fit for flight. You know what some of the limitations are. In addition to that, the required documents. So what are the 3 required documents that you are required to have? Remember, when we say required documents, this section is specifically talking about you, the pilot. So this is not for the airplane. In addition to that, what we have as well is this is the point where you're going to prove, can you fly your airplane for today's check ride? Okay, so what we have in these cases are going to be, depending on what aircraft you fly, if it's a high performance aircraft, do you need that endorsement or not? Is it a complex aircraft? Prove that you can fly is a fairly scenario based question, right? It's kind of an open-ended question because it deals with, what does your license say? Are you licensed for the appropriate category and class of aircraft? Is there a type rating that's required? And in addition to that, are there any additional endorsements? And it also deals with currency. It's actually quite a long answer if you answer it correctly. Privileges and limitations. So what can you do or what can you not do as a pilot? So the other one as well is we then move into the aircraft section. So the aircraft is basically the same thing as the pilot passengers, except what we're doing is we are going to be basically making sure that the aircraft is healthy and safe, and we understand that it has all of its records. It's up to date. We understand the actual aircraft systems, and we know what to do in the event that we go to the aircraft and something's broken. All of this stuff is literally a ditto repeat of your private pilot. So it's nothing that's out of the ordinary. So remember that they're going to review the actual documents in Aero for the purposes of your check ride, and you're going to prove that that aircraft out there that you're about to take meets all the requirements. So it has all of its required documents. It has all of its logbook entries. In addition to that, you'll be able to have to describe the actual systems that are required. So being able to describe the pitot-static system, the associated errors with the pitot-static system, the fuel system, hydraulics, power plant, electrics. Now, this is the only one that's a little bit different. So in most check rides, you're only describing the systems as it relates to your aircraft. Your examiner could potentially ask you to describe retractable landing gear, de-icing systems, pressurization systems, and like I said, this is, I mean, John, it's an exact same thing. The class is kind of a repeat of the private pilot, and all they do is literally just kind of go into a little bit more detail in a couple areas like aircraft systems. They're still going to have you plan a flight and everything else. It's kind of amazing. So the last thing is the inoperative equipment. So inoperative equipment is the examiner is going to give you 4 or 5 things broken on that aircraft. And they're going to basically, you're going to go through the process of can you fly or can you not fly on today's flight. All right, the last and the biggest section here is the environment. So this is the point where they've asked you to plan a flight, and keep in mind it's going to be a VFR flight, not an IFR flight. But the VFR flight will be from a certain point to a certain point. So a couple of the examiners here in California, where we're based out of, will basically go from the LA area up to Napa Valley during a daytime flight, and then take a continuation of that specific flight from Napa Valley to South Lake Tahoe in the evening, which is kind of a high density altitude airport. So remember, anytime we're doing a flight plan, all you're going to do is walk the examiner through exactly how you plan the flight. Talk to them like a pilot. So what that means is basically talk about the weather that you pulled for the flight, the actual weather, the METARs, the forecast, any type of concerns that you had with the weather. So are there any SIGMETs, AirMets? How did you choose the altitude? All of those wonderful things that we normally deal with. Talk about your airport concerns, both on your departure and your arrival airport. So anything that might be concerning are going to be found generally in the NOTAMs, so closed taxiways, closed runways, airport hotspots, land and hold short, airspace requirements, terrain, specific conditions unique to that airport. So for us here at Camarillo, we have a lot of training activity, and what's kind of unique to our airport is that we have 3 different airports in a very, very small radius of each other. They're all within 4 or 5 miles of each other. So that would be a unique condition. Your flight plan, most of our examiners out here confirm with your instructor, but our examiners out here allow us, by the time you get to your commercial, you can do digitized flight plans. You don't have to do it by hand. But once again, how did you select your route? What is the altitude? How did you make those overall decisions? And keep in mind, do not drive a flight plan with 2 waypoints in it. Remember, your flight plan needs to have waypoints roughly every 25 to 35 nautical miles. I've seen examiners fail students before because they didn't really take the flight planning seriously. They just drew a straight line literally from point A to point B, or had like 1 point in between for a 200 nautical mile flight. Do your due diligence and make sure you're planning accordingly. Airspace and chart symbology, as you walk through your flight plan, what you want to do is you basically want to walk through it and explain everything that's on that VFR chart, because remember, everything on that chart is fair game for the examiner to ask. So that includes airspace, weather requirements, VORs, whatever it may or may not be. If you were to use this IFR example, like I have on the board here, what you're looking for is, why did you choose the different things? How did I choose this route to get into Bakersfield? Okay. And then really, as I'm walking you through the route, I'm going to start explaining everything, right? The flag with the X, right? That's a minimum crossing altitude. What is a minimum crossing altitude? You're going to describe what it is and not just tell them what specifically it is. Keep in mind, I'm just giving you the example for the IFR chart, even though that you will be on the VFR world here, okay? Everything is up for grabs though. Why is something, in this case, colored green, right? We know on the IFR charts, green colored airports happen to be airports that have an instrument approach, right? We know that brown airports don't have an instrument approach, but they have greater than 3,000 feet of pavement. And then there's some airports that do not have an instrument approach and have less than 3,000 feet of pavement, and they are not listed on the actual IFR en route load charts. So keep in mind, it's the same thing, exactly like Missy says. Usually what I do is I have students create a binder with all of the information kind of put together. And it just depends. It's usually, you want to calculate all of your takeoff and landing performance in this section. And half the time, if you have this, they're never going to look at it. They just want to know that you've done the work as it should be appropriate. Okay. So once you're done with the environment is probably, 75% of it. The last E in the PAVE is external factors, or external pressures, that is. This is really just kind of throughout what is going on in the middle of your oral. So remember, this really applies there to everybody. In general aviation, there's nowhere that we have to be, okay? If someone actually needs to be specifically at a point, you can basically drive them down to the airport. at a major airport, that is, send them on an airline like a 121 carrier, and they have a better chance of getting them there than you do in a general aviation aircraft. Okay, so and this is kind of the challenge when we get into the commercial environment, because someone is now paying us for that time. And if you're flying a private jet, it can be very challenging sometimes to say no to the person who's paying you, who wants to get home or wants to get to their meeting or something along those lines. So we've seen what happens in the event that some of these external factors will build upon each other. So the biggest ones that we usually say are going to be the get home, the get there itis, if you will. It's kind of this specific personal goal, if you will. Maybe you've been flying for 5 days straight and you really, really want to go home. In addition to that, there is the pressures of, for example, your boss. Let's say that the weather conditions are not really conducive for a flight, and this person is really pushing you because they've got a big family event, or they have they've got a really important business meeting in the morning. When you get into the charter environment, especially at smaller companies, it's going to be your responsibility to kind of manage everything. You are the dispatcher, the fueler, the caterer. You're doing your flight planning. You're kind of doing it all as kind of a one-man or two-man show in this case. So in this circumstance, remember that you might have to encourage someone to take an airline if it's that important, and even try to find it. So, there's a lot of gray areas. For example, especially in the charter world, what we talk about is the fact that, you're going to have these passengers, and of course, charter flights have a lot of booze and alcohol on them. We're technically not supposed to be carrying passengers who are intoxicated on a flight, right? But are you going to be the individual that's going to tell them they can't board? And those are kind of questions that you're going to have to ask yourself as you move into that environment. A lot of people kind of turn a blind eye in a way, but I can't tell you what to do or what not to do. All right, so that's kind of the PAVE checklist in a nutshell. What I wanted to do is just go a little bit further in depth in terms of the pilot passengers and look at that, and then we're going to wrap everything up here. We'll be out of here in just a little bit, everyone. So for those of you that don't remember, remember that first section in pilot passengers is really proving that you are healthy, you're safe. And that also goes with your passengers. The FAA says it's a pilot only. I've kind of added the word passenger to that because I don't want to take someone who's sick up there or is potentially under the influence of any type of alcohol or drugs, because it's going to make my life a lot more challenging. So remember, the I'm Safe acronym stands for illnesses. So are you suffering from any illness? Is the passenger suffering from any illness? There's definitely certain things that are not going to be conducive to flight, especially for passengers, such as ear infections or sinus issues. Medications, are you currently taking any medications, whether that's prescription or over-the-counter medications? And remember, the ultimate answer to that is going to be the fact that if you ever had to take a medication, I do know that there are lists out there of drugs like the AOPA list and a few others. But at the end of the day, if you take 2 approved over-the-counter medications, the AOPA and all these other drug lists don't tell you what happens if you take multiple medications that are over-the-counter at the same time. We don't know what the indications are. At the end of the day, if you take Tylenol, Advil in the same time, will it do anything? Probably not. But the ultimate answer that they're really looking for is that you would just ask an AME. And the AME will then obviously tell you if you're good to go or not. Stress. So this kind of falls in line with external factors. So there's a variety of different type of stresses out there. Obviously, there is stress from family situations, relationships. There's obviously stress from work. If you're going to school, school can cause stress as well. So keep in mind that you don't want to take someone up or yourself up if you're heavily stressed. That'd be a day to call out. The next one is alcohol. We all remember the 8-hour bottle to throttle rule. So you need to be at least 8 hours bottle to throttle and less than 0.04% blood alcohol content. And then in addition to that, you cannot carry visibly intoxicated passengers unless they are under medical treatment. So basically direct medical supervision, or it's some type of emergency event. Maybe, Dante's volcano went off or something like that, and you decided to be nice and take them along, even though they had a few too many. Fatigue, so have you had enough and sufficient rest and nutrition, that is. So remember, there's two different types of fatigue. The first type of fatigue is going to be acute fatigue. Acute fatigue would be something like, I stayed up all night studying for this check ride, and I'm just really tired. Chronic fatigue is no matter how many times I get 8 hours of sleep per night, I am just still tired all the time. That's usually going to be associated with some type of medical condition such as narcolepsy or sleep apnea. So those are the two types they want you to know about. Eating and emotions. Have you had enough to eat? Emotions, once again, kind of play into it as well. Is there any type of life events that might be kind of upsetting? Those are things that we don't want to fly with as well. All right, so in terms of what are the required documents that we need to have in our possession, we've talked about these in the past. So obviously you need a valid government issued ID, your pilot's license, and in your case, apologize guys, it should actually be a second class medical, not a third class. You need a third class medical for the purposes of taking your actual test, but if you want to operate in the commercial environment, you need a second class medical, all right? The other one that we have is, remember I said prove to me or prove to the examiner that you are capable of taking whatever aircraft for today's check ride. So in the example I give you, this is just an aircraft that happens to be a Cessna 182 Alpha. So this is a 230 horsepower engine, and it happens to be an airplane single engine land. So the first part of that question is going to be, what does your license say? All right. So you would go and show them the back of your license or explain to them that the back of your license effectively says the following. It is an airplane, which is the category, and it's a single engine land. The Cessna is also an airplane. That's the category, and it's a single engine land. So it matches. So that's a good start. We know that at least we can fly the same category and class. It doesn't require type rating. Now, the next question is are there any special endorsements that are required to fly the aircraft? So in terms of special endorsements, you need to know that obviously you need a high performance, which is any time that you're flying an aircraft greater than 200 horsepower, so 201 plus. So that's one that is required. So I want to make sure that I show them that I have that endorsement. But there are some other potential ones that could be required. So in this case, we do have a complex aircraft, and a complex is going to be one that has flaps, either a constant or adjustable speed prop, and retractable landing gear. A high altitude is one that is pressurized and has a service ceiling greater than 25,000 feet MSL, and also a tail wheel. So just because your aircraft doesn't qualify, you should at least mention what are the other ones that are available to us, and what does that actually mean for each one. Don't just say, well, the other ones that I don't need are complex, high altitude, and tail wheel. Well, explain what each one of those are. And then the final thing is a type rating required to fly this aircraft? Well, no. Type ratings are only required anytime that the aircraft has a gross weight of 12,500 pounds or more. It's some type of turbine-powered aircraft, or there's a very, very few FAA special type required. All right, so those are the biggest ones that you want to have. Now, that matches the licensing requirements and the endorsements, but there's still more to this question if you want to answer it appropriately. Okay, in addition to having the appropriate licenses and certificates you also need to have the correct currency. Okay, so remember, if you were to think of currency in a linear fashion, the very first thing that you need is, in order to fly just by yourself with no passengers, you're required to have a flight review, and the flight review needs to be done every 24 calendar months. So that flight review is a minimum of an hour of ground and an hour of flight. There are two ways to bypass the flight review. The first and easiest way is going to be obtain a new license or rating or certificate in these cases. And number two would be to participate in the WINGS program. So that's the FAA safety program that's available to us. So those are the ways that we can bypass it. So that's to fly by ourselves. But now, obviously, as commercial pilots, we want to make sure that we are flying with passengers or able to carry passengers. So what we're going to do is we need to look at the requirements to carry those passengers. So remember, to carry passengers during the day, we need 3 takeoff and landings at a minimum within the preceding 90 days, and those takeoff and landings, it can be a touch and go, stop and go, full stop landing, unless we're in a tailwheel aircraft. If we're in a tailwheel aircraft, then it has to be made to a full stop, okay? In order to carry passengers at night, same deal, 3 takeoff and landings within the preceding 90 days, but all landings have to be to a full stop. Your daytime landings cannot count for your nighttime landings, but your nighttime landings can count for your daytime landings. Now you notice here, I don't need to define, what is nighttime, what is civil twilight, anything like that. The FAA test did that for us. For those of you with an instrument rating, hopefully most of us out there going into the commercial, remember that this is what it kind of looks like. So the bottom arrows here, you need 6 hits. So within per 6 months, you need to have 6 approaches, holding, intercepting, and tracking. If you go beyond 6 months, then you're going to need to do those 6 hits, but you have to do them with either a safety pilot, a DPE, or a CFI, CFII in either case. If you wait more than 12 months or a year and you forget to do all of your approaches, then you need an IPC, which is more of a pain in the butt than anything. So the IPC has to be done with either a CFII or a DPE, and it's treated kind of like a check ride. It's a pass-fail check ride. You don't have to do it all at the same time. So it's always easier if you really run into the situation, at least to kind of nip it in the butt in that second half if you haven't done it already, okay? All right, so that's kind of what it looks like if you were to put that all together. So that's what you would expect to see if you were kind of using this method for the pilot passenger. So if you were going to do this flight, and remember, when you walk into a, I'll see how quickly I can do this. We'll keep this to like 10 minutes, everybody. All right, so if I were to do this for an examiner, obviously the examiner would be checking over all my records. They'd make sure that I'm qualified to actually sit for whatever exam I'm taking, in this case, the commercial. And then at that point, they're basically going to say, do you have any more questions? And of course, if the answer is yes or no, but once you answer it and they've answered any questions and you're satisfied, that is really when the check ride begins. They're not supposed to offer assistance from that point forward. I know most DPEs, though, they have a natural teaching tendency, or they always want to teach you something, so sometimes they can't help it. But if I were basically teaching this to one of my students, and I've gotten hundreds of students through using the same principles here, this is how I'd respond. So, all right, Mr. or Mrs. Examiner, you basically asked me to plan a flight, let's say from the LA Camarillo area up to Napa Valley. It's a daytime VFR flight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this entire process using the PAVE checklist. PAVE checklist stands for Pilot, Passengers, Aircraft, Environment, and External Factors. So what we're going to do is the first thing is we're going to really look and make sure that we're healthy and we're safe, both of us, before we head out. To do that, we're basically going to use the Pilot, Passengers, and the first thing we're going to do is start off with the I'm Safe acronym. So I'm safe, if we look at it, is illnesses. I'm currently not ill. If I were ill in any capacity, I would actually be not taking this flight. You appear to be healthy, and I basically ask the examiner, are they healthy? Do they have any concerns at this point in time? The other thing that I usually like to bring up at this point is I will usually ask the question, do you ever get motion sickness or potentially anything along those lines? This can actually save you, because if you answer this question on the ground, you don't have to deal with it in the air. So usually what I'll say is, even if you don't get motion sickness, if you were to get motion sickness, try to let me know as soon as possible. And then what we'll do to remedy it is we'll have you look outside the window, try to not stare at the cockpit instruments, and we'll open up the air vents. And of course, we might have a bag if necessary. So the other ways that some examiners are doing this is they'll just start acting as if they're motion sick, while you're actually in flight, which is it's easier to deal with on the ground to show them the skills to do it. The next one is M for medications. So for medications, I'm not currently taking any medications. If I were to take any medications, prescription or over the counter, I would basically check with my AME, my aviation medical examiner, to determine if I can basically fly or not fly. The S is stress. It is a check ride. I am understanding that it is a stressful environment, but I'm well prepared today. I feel very confident in my preparation, working with my flight instructor. So hopefully we'll look for a good outcome at the end of the day. The next one is alcohol. So it's 8 hours bottled throttle, less than 0.04% blood alcohol content. I don't really drink very often, but for me, probably had a beer or something about a week or two ago. So right now, I'm not under the influence of any type of alcohol or drugs. I have, in terms of carrying passengers, I can't carry any passengers that are under the influence or visibly intoxicated, that is, unless they're under direct medical supervision or it's some type of emergency situation in nature. The next one is fatigue. There's two different types of fatigue. The first one is going to be acute fatigue. So let's say I stayed up all night and I just was really, really tired from all this studying. And the second type is going to be chronic fatigue. So that means no matter how many hours of sleep I get, over and over and over. So I keep getting 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, and I am just exhausted all the time. That's going to usually be associated with some type of medical condition such as sleep apnea or narcolepsy are two good examples. But for last night prior to the check ride, I was able to get a decent night's sleep, so I am well rested here. Next one is eating and emotions. At this point in time, I don't have any conflicts, home, personal stress, anything along those lines, and I had a good breakfast. During the check ride today and throughout the oral, I'll go ahead and stack on things, and I'll also grab probably a little bite to eat before we go up in the air, so that seems all set. In terms of that, my required documents, you've seen the 3 required documents while looking at my logbook at the beginning before we started the actual oral portion. So that was a valid government issued ID. You saw my pilot's license and you saw my medical. For the purposes of today's check ride, I just need a 3rd class medical, but to actually operate or under the privileges and limitations of a commercial pilot, I need to have at least a minimum of a 2nd class medical. Because I am less than 40 years of age, that medical is valid for 24 calendar months. And then, of course, they might ask you what happens if you're over 40 years of age as well. So those would be the 3 documents. For the purposes of today's flight, we're going to be flying a Cessna 182 Slant Alpha. So it is a 230 horsepower airplane single engine land. As shown on the back of my FAA certificate or license, that is, my category that I'm allowed to fly is airplane, and then mine says single engine land. The Cessna is an airplane and it's a single engine land. It has a fixed gear. So it's a fixed tricycle gear. It doesn't have a tail wheel or anything like that. Now, there are 4 potential endorsements that I may or may not need. The first endorsement, which I do actually need, is a high performance endorsement. High performance endorsement is required anytime that you have an aircraft with 200 horsepower or greater, or 201, 202, and so forth upwards. As mentioned, this is 230 horsepower, so I am required to have this endorsement. The other 3 endorsements that are potential are going to be a complex endorsement, which is required anytime you have a retractable gear, flaps, and or constant speed prop. You need all 3 in order to qualify. If you just have 1 or 2 out of the 3, it doesn't necessarily meet the requirements. In addition to that, you also have your high altitude endorsement for any aircraft operating above 25,000 feet MSL and the tail wheel. So as mentioned before, our aircraft is going to be a fixed tricycle gear, so it doesn't meet those requirements. There are some folks out there, if they were able to operate and log the time as discussed prior to specific dates listed in the Federal Aviation Regulations, then they're actually exempt from needing a specific endorsement. Beyond that, a type rating is not required for this aircraft. Type ratings are only required for aircraft weighing 12,500 pounds or more, turbine aircraft, or aircraft that are dictated by the actual FAA. In terms of currency, one thing that I would actually show them at this point is actually show them what personal limitations are. I would set my own personal limitations, have those on paper, and provide that information to the designated pilot examiner or your FAA safety inspector to basically show them the differences between what's legally required and what actually I would feel comfortable with as a proficient pilot. But for the basics of what we're going to be covering today, in order to fly by myself, I'm required to have a flight review, which was formerly known as a biannual flight review every 24 calendar months. That flight review consists of a minimum of an hour of ground and an hour of flight at minimum. There's 2 ways to bypass the flight review. That does include either participating in the safety program known as the FAA Wings program, or you could actually get a higher license and or rating, which would basically reset the clock and give you another 24 calendar months. If I want to carry passengers, which is the whole kind of point of commercial, if I don't want to carry boxes, that is, in order to carry passengers during the day, I need 3 takeoff and landings within the preceding 90 days. They have to be, they can actually be anything, full stop, taxi back, stop and go, unless I am in a tailwheel aircraft. In that case, they all have to be to a full stop landing. If I want to carry passengers at night, same deal, 3 takeoff and landings within the preceding 90 days, except they all have to be to a full stop. Daytime landings cannot count for my nighttime landings. Nighttime landings can count for my daytime landings. If I hold an instrument rating and I basically want to make sure that I am qualified, then remember that I need 6 hits, which is within the 6 months, 6 approaches, holding, intercepting, and tracking. I have 6 months to stay current. If I go beyond 6 months, and it's between the window of 6 months and 12 months, I can keep my currency by doing those 6 hits, but I have to go with a safety pilot, a flight instructor, or a designated pilot examiner, which are my options. If I go beyond that and I go 12 months, then what will end up happening is that I am required to then get a what the heck is it called? The instrument flight review thing that I can't remember, guys. But anyways, you're going to get that, and that has to be done through either a DPE or it has to be done through a CFII. Beyond that, I'm going to go through personal limitations, the privileges and limitations of a commercial pilot, which basically allow me to, in order to fly, whether it's passengers and or cargo, but in this case, I can fly them for hire. That's kind of the big thing. If I didn't have an instrument rating, then I would be limited to 50 nautical miles from the primary airport. I can only do daytime flights. So those would be my privileges and limitations. So Mr. and Mrs. Examiner, that basically proves that I'm healthy and I'm safe. Thank you, IPC. And at this point, then I would move into the actual, let's go through the A, which is aircraft. So I don't know how long that took, maybe 14, 15 minutes. I didn't really look, but that is how I would kind of approach the oral. And you can see, we got all the information out. I didn't have to pull teeth. And what you're doing is you're not just saying, well, it's this, a lot of students that come to me, they say, well, here's the endorsements. The endorsements are complex, high altitude, tail wheel. Well, if you explain it, then they're not going to question you. And a lot of times, if they really see that you're confident with your answers and you're answering this stuff and you're rapid fire and you're actually getting the correct information and content out there, I mean, there's plenty of, examiners out there that are going to be like, next, just move on. We know you get this, okay? So with that, everyone, that kind of wraps up how I would put together the oral. Keep in mind, there are some other segments to that, like aircraft, and then also the environment, which is a big factor of it. And what I usually do for students is I put together check ride binders. So we put this stuff together in the order as presented. But even if you had an examiner that did not want to follow this order, by compartmentalizing this information, you can basically figure out what they're asking you and then basically take it out of your head a lot easier than just, a lot of instructors out there are like, well, just study everything. There's a lot of stuff to study, right? There's too much stuff to study and it becomes disorganized, and then we don't do as well and we kind of feel under the gun at that point. So if you do it in a much logical order, it makes your life a lot easier when it comes to your check ride or any check ride. The only thing that this does not work for is the CFI check ride, because it's the old school one of the Q&A type stuff. So, but this works for private all the way through commercial, all right? So with that, everyone, I want to thank everybody and the team and those types of things. I hope to see everyone in some of our future classes. We do have a turbine one coming up. I think it's right before Thanksgiving or the week after Thanksgiving. So if you're interested in basically airline operations, the things that are kind of just like Part 121 stuff, turbine operations, and those types of things, we're going to get into those types of details that are not necessarily related to just the commercial, but I kind of find them interesting and fun to talk about. Okay. So with that, I want to thank everybody, thank my team out there. If you have any questions at any point in time, you guys and gals know where to find us. We're not going anywhere, and you're more than welcome to check in with the private pilot class. As mentioned, tomorrow we're going to be finishing up the airspace section. So if anybody else needs a good refresh of your airspace, you're more than welcome to join. I will send out the announcement on Friday afternoon about what time we're meeting on Saturday. So if you have any questions between now and then, having any issues, please let us know, and I'm happy to answer those. And then what we'll do as well is, like I said, we'll keep you guys posted and we'll kind of go from there. So thank you, everybody. Yep, got out of here a little bit early. That was kind of the goal tonight. Let me know if you have any more questions. And then as usual, what ends up happening with all these courses is they will never stay in this format. These courses are then going to be broken down even further. There is more content that I want to add to each one of these courses, including the commercial course. I have actually a list of stuff that I want to make videos for and continue adding. Usually in the past, what I've done is 2 days a week, I go to the studio and I do the recordings, and then I basically can update and kind of expand and improve the content, just like we do with our other classes. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. I wish I went to New York and New Jersey, maybe one of these days. Thank you, everyone. So let me know if you have any more questions. It's the commercial. A lot of people think the commercial is like a lot of new knowledge, and the reality is the commercial is a supersized private pilot. So the new stuff is honestly going to be in the air, and that's really going to be kind of the new stuff. So that's where you kind of have to do the finesse of the maneuvers, and that's actually more challenging, in my opinion, than the ground section. Okay. Carl, I will try to get a list out, but I do have a paved checklist like the one that we're talking about that breaks it down into a little bit more detail. So I'll post that on the website. But the copy of the stuff in the binder, it usually started with me finding specific documents and then kind of putting it together, but I don't have a full listing of what it is. So thank you again, everyone. Appreciate it. Larry, I'll see you in the instrument class. So looking forward to it. Remember, guys, if you are basically needing any instrument refresher as well, you're more than welcome to join us in about 3 weeks from now. We're going to be covering all of the new stuff as well. So if you forgot, let's say RNP, required navigational performance, some of the more advanced RNAV approaches like the GLS system or the GBAS system, we'll be talking about that. GPS as well. So all of that is there. The information is up on the website for the actual final exam. So feel free to take that, and then you can submit your Google Doc at the end. Okay. Brett, we'll look forward to seeing you in the instrument class. Leaf, Q&A on Saturday, time to be determined. Right now, tentatively 3 p.m. Pacific time, but I'm going to double check that. I might actually have a student meeting, so I might need to flip that around, okay? Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, Cody, for putting the Discord link out there. Rex, I do not know the time. Tentatively put it down in pencil at this point. Very, very light pencil, 3 p.m. on Saturday. Like I said, I have a student that has a check ride coming up, and I got to make sure that he is ready to go. So it might be either 11 a.m. or 3 p.m., but I'll let everybody know and make sure. So no chocolate yet, Mark. We'll see you in the instrument class, Carl. Have a great night, everyone. Stay safe out there. John, let me do me a favor, John, and just give me your email address in the private IM, and I'm happy to get you that link. Sorry about that. Thanks again for I can't even pronounce that. Fortunat, I believe. 11 or 3, one or the other, Rex, and I'll let you know when I solidify that decision. So for all you East Coasters, you're out a little bit early, so thanks again. Hopefully you guys get some rest here. Thanks, Rex. We'll see you soon. Carl, have a great one. Jerry, John. Allie, at the end of the 3 weeks or the 4-week course, you will get the private pilot certificate. So it's the FAA written as well. So those will be available. Thanks again, David. Have a great one. See. Have a good one. Adios, Crystal. All right, John. Thank you for sending me that. I will forward that on right now and get that to you here very shortly. All right, I just forwarded your message, John, so thanks again. I'll get that taken care of. David, we're based out of Camarillo, so if you're familiar with the airport, we are on the east end of the field in the alert hangars. We're in the giant hangars on that side, but we are actually on airport property. So a lot of people have problems trying to find us, actually. The airport has very bad information on addresses, but we're pretty hard to miss when it comes down to it. Let's see here. If anybody flies in and wants to say hi, by all means, always happy to meet people. And let's see, Camarillo Airport. All right, so if you go to our airport, like I said, we are on the west end of the field, and I guess I have to turn off the slide presentation here. So we're actually on the west end of the field, and on the west end, let's see if that works or not. So maybe not. I don't know if you guys can see the screen or not. On the west end of the field, we're actually in these giant alert hangars, but they're blue and white, kind of hard to miss. But it is behind the fence. So if you want to visit, the closest address to us is the Civil Air Patrol building in Camarillo, and I can buzz you guys in from the gate. So, or you have a gate card. That works, Dave. East end, alert hangars. Dave or David, if you know where Rick's hangar is, the Camarillo Aircraft Services, we actually share the same hangar complex as him. Raquel, awesome. Yeah, if you fly out of KC, then feel free to say hi. Occasionally I go down there as well. So oh, that's awesome. Wait, where do you live, Cody? Said 30 minutes. We're not in all of the alert hangars. We're specifically in this one right there. So that's where our hangar is, and that's actually where we broadcast out of. And then our office is that one right there. So we have a separate office facility. So that's where we are actually located. I don't know if that actually shows up though when you guys are looking at this. Thanks, Madison. Oh, okay, Cody. So you're actually near me. You're actually near me. Yeah, I'm off of Chesbro, Cody, if you know where that is. Oh, okay, cool. On my other computer, it doesn't show up. But usually what I do, if you don't have a gate card and you're not from Camarillo, you can go to the Civil Air Patrol building, and then there's actually a little tiny gate. That gate is right there where that little dashed line is, and it's literally like a 500-600 foot walk to our offices. So that's where we are. Oh, Q&A page, Q&A. See what Q&As are hiding from me, everyone. Yeah, if you guys stop by, there's a really good $100 burger here. They have amazing food actually at the airport. So, and they're actually open finally. Exactly, Missy. Still waiting for you to visit me, Miss Missy. No, you said check out the Q&A. I am on Q&A page, at least as far as I can tell, unless I'm missing something. I'll see if I can find, I don't need that. I'll see if I can see the other ones here, but let me know if I'm missing them, Missy, because I don't see any of the others. Tri-tip night, exactly. That one's really good as well. Yeah, my view doesn't allow me to see the Q&A page. I don't know why. I think it moves them. I think it meshes them all together. So I'm just trying to go through any of the questions and kind of see if I missed anything here. If anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and resubmit them if maybe I missed them. Yeah, Brett, it'll be a long trip from Maryland, but we're also planning on potentially going to Sun and Fun if it runs this year in Florida, and then also going to Oshkosh. So if anybody's heading out there, feel free to say hi. Oh, okay, Cody. I didn't realize you volunteer at the CAF down there, so you know all those guys. Okay. All right, Maurice, confused about flying for hire with the commercial certificate. So you have the ability to basically be hired and fly for compensation, whether you're flying with boxes or people. That's really what the commercial certificate allows you to do, but there's certain things that you have to kind of abide by. You cannot just go out and advertise yourself and say that you're going to run flights from point A to point B, because that kind of falls into the charter territory. So there's a lot of little gray areas that you have to watch out for. You can advertise yourself if you happen to be banner towing or flight instructing are two good examples. But in some of the other capacities, you have to kind of be careful because there's some stipulations out there. But for the most part, your commercial license certificate will allow you to at least get paid for your flights. Okay. Leaf was asking the Q&A on Saturday. We are doing the Q&A on Saturday right now. It is tentatively planned for 3 p.m. I will let everybody know by tomorrow via email what it is, and that will be posted on Facebook. So I will keep everyone posted. Like I said, I got to make sure the student gets through their check ride. So that's what we're talking about. Let's see. Russ is asking, where do you post on your site that check ride page? So the check ride stuff, I'll post it later tonight, Russ, but I usually put it in lesson 12, the very last lesson of all of our courses. So that way you can review the information after you're done with the courses. Maurice, the holdback thing, you're thinking of holding out. So holding out is just a fancy way of saying I'm advertising my services. So you can advertise your services as long as they fit under a certain category. So like I said, you can advertise that you're a flight instructor. You can advertise that you're doing banner towing and a few other things. The regulations will tell you what you can and can't advertise. But then for most of the other things, you cannot hold out or advertise. You can't say, like I said, I'm going to fly 6 times a day back and forth between these 2 airports and provide those types of services fall under either Part 135 or Part 121, which are basically scheduled and non-scheduled operations. If that makes sense as well, John. Awesome. Glad you got it. Aha, Larry. Perfect. Fire away, Maurice. What other question do you have, sir? So the airport that I was referring to at the Grand Canyon was, and it wasn't necessarily at the Grand Canyon. It was to the east of the Grand Canyon. I will see if I can find the name of it here for you. So that, yeah, it's not the that airport that you're saying that I can't pronounce. It's actually just north of that. It's in Monument Valley. So it is a private airport, and it's an Indian reservation. I believe. So what you do is you call these folks on the phone ahead of time, and they let you land there. All that they do is they force you to buy something. It happens to be this airport called Monument Valley, which is just north of it. And like I said, it's a private airport. You give them a call ahead of time. They meet you there with a van. They drop you off to the gas station. Once you buy something at the gas station, they leave you alone and you kind of go explore. There is a hotel that sits right next to that canyon, and they've got a restaurant and stuff, but it's just kind of east of Page. So usually what I would do in the past is I usually depart Page Airport, fill up, kind of tool around, and basically, if I can, I'll kind of do a straight out departure. I'll go kind of this way around this large mountain, Navajo Mountain, and then I'll kind of come in here. But remember, Monument Valley is kind of famous for those really cool monuments that stick out, or the rocks that stick straight up. If you can get low enough, it looks really cool. And then you can land in Monument Valley. And at that point, I then kind of circle back around and go back to Page, because this airport doesn't have fuel. I wouldn't go in here at night though, because it's not lit either. So let's see, Maurice, let me see here. So Maurice, you can fly as a corporate pilot. You can be hired as you can basically be hired as a pilot, whether it is a corporate pilot or for charter services or anything along those lines. So whether they're a 135 company, a part or a Part 91 company, you can get hired if you have a commercial certificate and you have the appropriate ratings and that type of stuff. So that's all you need. Okay. Yeah, if you get a chance, really, really cool airport, Monument Valley. Like I said, challenging airport. So there are no questions on the banner towing. So the glider towing, those types of things, there's only questions as it relates to regulations. So for those types of things, you do need a little bit of additional training, or at least to have the skills for it. And you can find that in the actual regulation. You're very welcome, Maurice. Have a good one. Adios, Cody. Talk to you later. Thanks again. Any more questions, anybody? Thanks again, Maurice. Appreciate it. So Daniel, you do not need an endorsement to tow gliders. You just need the experience. If you look at the private pilot regulations out there, it will tell you exactly what you need. Larry's asking, are there apps people can list themselves on to fly others around, or I guess for, what was that, comp during weekends for fun? There are a lot of like flying groups out there, like local flying groups, if you guys are interested in just flying around, like on Facebook. But also if you want to kind of do a good deed, there are a couple nonprofit organizations out there where you can fly, whether it's pets if you want, or you can potentially fly, folks to medical appointments. So there's a lot of good organizations out there that will get you up in the air. There's no additional currency requirements, Daniel. It's just, I'd have to actually look at the regulation itself. So like I said, it's in, I think it's 60, it's like 61, like 129 or somewhere around that area, or 113. So you can act as you can tow banners. See, it's on this page here. Yeah, so the only requirement that it says in regulations is that if you hold a private pilot license and you meet specific requirements, then you can act as pilot in command of an aircraft towing a glider or unpowered ultralight vehicle So there's nothing about banners. It's just towing another vehicle. And then you'd have to cross-reference that with this other section, which is 6169. So if you look at 6169, that deals with glider and unpowered ultralight vehicle towing, so experience. So you have to hold at least a private, commercial, or ATP certificate with the correct category and license. You need at least 100 hours of piloting command in that aircraft. And then you actually do need a logbook endorsement from an authorized instructor. And they have to tell you about certain things like emergency procedures, signals used, maximum angles of bank. So that's actually kind of news to me. But you do actually need an endorsement to tow another aircraft. So I've never actually done it myself. So, oh, apps for compensation. Yeah, so there are a couple of shady apps out there for compensation, Larry. What was it? They are very, very questionable in nature. And the FAA, I forget, I think it was called Blackbird. Blackbird was one of them. And I think they've actually changed their policies. So they had some issues with the FAA because Blackbird was trying to act like the Uber of the sky, meaning, they basically matched up pilots with people who wanted rides. And the problem with that was that everybody was an independent contractor. And really what they were doing at the end of the day was they were acting as a Part 135 charter operator, but they didn't have a charter license. That's what I mean by shady or kind of in that gray area. So they were fined and a few other things. I think they've changed their practices, but you can look up Blackbird. A lot of, there's really no rental company or flight school that will allow you to rent their aircraft to be used for compensation or hire. So if you have your own aircraft, then I think that's another story, but just research it, find out some more information. But I think that was the company that's pretty famous out there for that stuff. Okay. Missy, you're faster than me. I like my my traditional far aim, but the sad thing is that I just got my 2021, so all my little flags and stuff have to be removed, and I need to re-highlight. So yeah, the charter license is the problem. I think they actually have received one now, but like I said, you just got to make sure that you don't get in trouble as well. I don't know what happened to the pilots that were flying when they didn't have a charter license. I don't know if they got reprimanded or talked to or whatever the case was. If you Google them, you'll find the news articles. I think that because they were fined and they worked with the FAA, I think they worked it out, but I don't know much more than that. Yeah, same thing, Missy. It always takes me a couple hours to dig up the actually mark up my far aim. So, all right, everybody. Any more questions before we head out here for the evening? Yes, Crystal, I am next to the Civil Air Patrol unit, but they are not open due to COVID. So I believe it's one of the smaller units too. Oh, there you go. So John says Blackbird was acquired by Surf Air. So Surf Air is definitely a more professional organization. Very welcome, David. Have a great one. The other one, Missy, is Jet Suite. So Jet Suite is pretty popular around here. Basically get to work for like a mini airline and then get to go home almost every single night, which is kind of nice. Oh, I bet, Daniel. Adios, Maurice. Lulu. Okay. All right, everybody. I hope everyone enjoyed the class. The lifetime membership is still available, and I know there's still a couple spots for the one-on-one things. So if you guys like that type of stuff, feel free to go for it. It will be ending here in just a couple days. But thank you again, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming to class and bearing with us for the five classes that we had. Hopefully see everybody here in the near future in another course. And I hope everyone takes care, stay safe out there, and we will talk with everyone later. If you guys and gals have any questions, feel free to email us. We're always available. But other than that, have a great one. Possibly see you tomorrow or Saturday, everybody. Take care.